How's that for a slice of fried gold?
Oh, you think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We are three men who love, apparently, Star Trek a lot, but also other movies, and we research them and study them and bring you all the information, everything you could ever fucking possibly want to know about a movie. You'll get it in this podcast. I'm one of your hosts,
then
Gary
some.
Horn. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you saying your name, Gary Horn.
Yes, that's me.
I'm co-host Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Let me ask you, what do you get when you combine a New York restaurateur, DeVito, DiCaprio, into a crowded room? For Jimmy Cameron, absolutely nothing. Consequently, that collapse, combined with Arnie's craving for continued commercial clout, caused Curtis in a crunch to klutzily cut a rug, while Catherine quietly called out the conspired canoodling with the co-star. The creator was cautious to continue creating cars and cool stuff conceived in a computer, but couldn't completely cast aside the cash cow that could be this comedic cascade. So come along as we continue to chronicle the career of James Cameron in this fifth chapter of our series titled The Man of Tomorrow.
Wow, that was some V for Vendetta shit there, Todd.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You know what I got out of that
for
was
Vendetta.
What I got out of that was Danny DeVito in this movie?
Gary has not read the notes.
Yep. Gary's not read the note.
There's a brief Danny DeVito mention, but no, he may have been better in the Tom Arnold role, but we'll get to that later.
Oh,
Yes.
that would have been so great.
That is funny. So listen, but as we get started, I've been on a mission with this James Cameron shit because I want to understand what this guy's deal is. And obviously, we've heard about his rep, but early on, I think we were like, well, he might be misunderstood. He's just a business guy. He's down to business. Yeah. But slowly, we've started to see that intensity build up with him. And what's weird is that I'm finding with him is it feels like he just had these like humble beginnings. The stuff we talked about before, Canadian guy interested in movies, like science. Well, you can go back to the other episodes and see all that. But John H. Richardson has a great article from Premiere Magazine around this time where he dug in with Cameron a little bit more than I've seen in like prior stuff. And so I was getting into the True Lies stuff, but he had some good stuff about his past. And well, I don't remember us talking about him being a kid so much. He talks about his parents a lot, about how his dad was insanely strict and a huge disciplinarian. And it made James Cameron, he says he resents from being a child, like he resents ever being told what to do. Like, don't tell me what I can't do ever.
Yeah.
So he wanted to be the guy who gets to tell people what to do, basically.
Exactly. And but even as a kid, he was already like doing stuff. We may have mentioned some of this, but he was like bossing other kids around, getting them to make projects for him. Yeah, the rafts and forts and go-karts and the sea lab for mice that they put in the Niagara. He even described like a catapult and stuff that they were making that launched.
He made like a weather balloon that flew over his neighborhood when he was a kid, and it was like a rocket with a balloon on it. It almost started like burned the whole neighborhood down. And
wow. He even tells a story about this kid who like stole some of his toys, one of their neighbors. And I don't remember us talking about it, but like him and his brother Mike then went and like sawed partially through the limbs underneath the tree house. In just the right way. So when the kid went back in the treehouse, it collapsed and sent him to the hospital. Jeez. He's a little fucking psychopath. Yeah. But then he talks about his mom too, and how like she was super supportive, artist, got him into painting, got him his first gallery show. And is 100% the reason he has sympathy for independent, badass women, because he remembers seeing her being frustrated. He felt like she was frustrated being chained to the house all the time with the kids, and she wanted to get out and do things for herself. And Anyway, I know we talked about some of this, but again, too, he talks about with like 2001, like how much it pissed him off. And I remember us talking about 2001, but he talks about how you'll watch it like 10 times in a row and then went and started building models and experimenting with 16 millimeter film because he couldn't figure out how Kubrick did it. And so it pissed him off that this guy had built something he didn't know how to build. And so he said he would like lay in bed at night and listen to really bad music and visualize space battles and like how to build them and stuff like that. And anyways, a really fascinating look at this guy and how he goes into it. And then he talks about seeing Star Wars and how it pissed him off even more. And he's just like, he said, that's when I wanted, he was like, that's when I got really busy because I was like, I should have made that.
Well, that was when it was him and Bill Wisher and Randy Frakes, you know, when they were already kind of working towards wanting to make movies. And then Star Wars was the one that's like, oh, we just got to fucking do this, guys. And then they went and made Xenogenesis.
Yeah. He talks about his first wife that, you know, she was a waitress at the time. He was like driving for like a school district or whatever. And then part of what ruined that relationship, I think, was that he went crazy. Like she thought he went crazy because that he had been this guy. He said, I mean, he literally, the quote was, my wife thought I was crazy. The guy who used to like to smoke dope and go to the river, drink beer, drive fast cars. All of a sudden, he's psychotic. She was afraid of me because he said he would like buy all these lenses and take them apart and find out how they worked and he built a dolly track, beam splitters. And this is all in their living room. Like he was like a mad scientist, like putting things together and pulling things apart. Wow. And he straight up says in this interview too, even when he went to the Roger Corman interview at New World, he said, he's like, my whole goal from the beginning was to get in there and spread like a virus. He said, he's like, and that's exactly what I did. He said, 3 weeks after I started, I had my own department. I hired people. Everybody else that worked there hated my guts. I won't talk about this forever, but he talked about even how much, like even the Piranha 2 director, I forget his name now, but he says he went there, you know, to Rome when he went there. You can go back to the first episode of Cameron. We talked about that, but he talks about the director was so scared of him. He carried like a letter opener and thought the Cameron was going to attack him or something. And so this is the guy we're talking about. And then he talks about studios a lot in the interview, just like how much he hates studios and that he got disheartened because like Orion wasn't properly supportive of him. In the Terminator, he talks about how the guy from Orion like came up to him and was like, listen, this is what's going to happen. You got a down and dirty action thriller. It plays for 2 weeks, drops by 50% the second weekend. It's going to be gone by the third week. That's what to expect. And he's like, that's not what we expect. He said that it gets #1 and great reviews. And he said, and then he went to Orion and they refused to support it. They wouldn't beef up the ad campaign. He's like, they treated me like dog shit. And then Harlan Ellison comes out with all the stuff about that he thought of it. He was like, you didn't fucking think of this. And Harlan Ellison, they even had some stuff from Harlan Ellison saying is that he got all my best stuff. But the wonderful thing is he combined it with new, fresh, and interesting ways. I would have been very flattered. All he had to do was get on the phone with me. And Cameron would not. Cameron said, time travel and robots are sci-fi themes that are very common. And he argued with him, Dell and Orion, even giving him the credit that he got on the movie. They said, fine, if you want to fight him, we'll support you. But if you lose, we'll sue you. I don't know. He's still bothered by it at this point of this interview because he said, I could have gotten risk getting wiped out or I had to give this guy his fucking credit. Like he sounds like a crazy person. And then there's the talk about like how nuts he is in between movies too, like with the driving, flying, ballooning, all the stuff we talked about. Lance Hendrickson's in there with a story where he says he went to a party at his house one time and he had a brand new Acura NSX. He said Jim looks at him and says, nice car. And he says, when Jim says nice car, that's a challenge. So I had to say, Jim, why don't you take it for a spin? And he says he took it out for 10 minutes. And when he came back, the rubber on my back tires was gone. And Gail Ann Hurd's in there talking about it. She's like, oh, when we were dating, he's like, we went off-road on a 4-wheel drive, took the hot air balloon out, a huge wind came up, we ended up crashing it. We went horseback riding, ice skating, we shot AK-47s out in the desert. And she was like, that was the first weekend we dated. But he said they would like when they were dating and go into like movies and stuff sets, he would like race her. Like she had her Porsche and he had a Vet they would talk to each other on cell phones and play this game called Ditch 'em. And like they try to shake each other, and they're going like 120 miles per hour down the freeway and just having conversations on the cell phone. And I know that we've talked about how rich he is, the guy, but I didn't realize this either. And maybe we mentioned some of the Abyss, like how much he did all of this stuff. And his brother, Mike, is an aeronautical engineer, and he built all these things for the Abyss, but he has patents on so much of this stuff, like the CWAS driver propulsion vehicle and all that stuff. Like he's making a shit ton of money for.
What's the thing is, like, Cameron is a scientist who has an interest in film. I mean, he's got an engineer's brain, and he utilizes that. But yeah, he basically almost every film he makes, he's trying to create some sort of new technology to go along with it. And yeah, he owns that technology. It's going to happen again on this movie. It's going to happen again in a big way on Titanic, on Avatar. Like he's constantly creating new technologies that then other filmmakers will use. I mean, we talked about how the lighting rig that they created for the Abyss is now used by NASA to train their astronauts. So
it's insane. His brother Mike, he was describing like how they invent things. He says Jim dreams up a shot, figures out what he needs to execute it, finds out if the thing exists. If it doesn't exist, he tells me to make it. And if I say, from an engineering standpoint, that can't be done, Jim says, don't fucking use the word engineer around me ever again. And so, yeah. And then, of course, the last thing I'll mention, too, is that rep. I was finding more and more stories about the rep he has for just how, we mentioned in the last episode, the NFL thing about, he said, if an NFL coach didn't browbeat his guys and say, you fucked up and didn't do this, he says they point out the laziness and mistakes and blah, blah, blah. He's like, well, I'm the coach of this team and they're supposed to be the best in the business. All that stuff we talked about last time. I found like anonymous things where people say he just has like tunnel vision. Some people are very supportive of him. Like Ed Marsh is one of the crew guys on the Abyss, loves the guy, says he's great. He says, but he's definitely, quote, during the Abyss was saying, I'm letting you breathe. What else do you want? And there was one story from the Abyss I read later that said that a person claimed he was driving his Corvette around the underwater tank. I found a quote from Cameron that says that is not true, but it's a good idea.
Possible.
I mean, he said not true, but cool idea. And yeah, and Mike, and the stuff with Mike too, we talked about in the Abyss. I know this is in the past, but we talked about you mentioned you felt like this was a brother thing that they would do to each other. Mike plays the dead guy with the crab coming out of his mouth.
Yeah.
And Mike says 100%. That was like, James Cameron's like, you're doing this. And he said, you're going down 25 feet. You're going to open your fucking eyes because dead men don't close their eyes. You're going to put a live crab in your mouth. And when it's time to shoot, we'll tell you action and you let the crab out of your mouth. He said it took 5 takes. 2 times I had to crush the crab because Jim was taking too long getting the lights exactly where he wanted them. Oh. And he said, and he seemed delighted about it the whole time. Anyway, I'll shut up. But even Arnold had a quote in one of these saying, he's not the kind of guy who will try to say things in a diplomatic way.
Oh, come on. Use Arnold's voice. Come on.
I feel like I've been bad at it when
Just
I've listened back to the other episode.
Come on.
He's not the kind of guy who will try to say things in a diplomatic way. If you do something right, he will. Well, I don't know what happened there.
Or Transylvanian or something.
If you do something right. And listen, he says if you do something right, he'll say it was disastrous, but probably a human being could do no better. If he was dealing with machines, maybe they could do better. So you walk away from the whole thing going, well, I guess that means he likes it.
And Arnold seems to have a better grasp on who James Cameron is than a lot of his other actors because they've worked together a lot and they're friends. They hang out off screen as well. So as we discussed on our last episode, Terminator 2, that was at the time the most expensive movie ever made. The official production budget was in the like $70 million range, but with the cost to secure Cameron's involvement, Schwarzenegger's involvement, and the rights to the series, which we all discussed on that episode, the actual cost of the film was somewhere close to $100 million, which far surpassed anything else that had ever been made. But when it was released, it made $500 million, which was an unheard of amount in 1991. And it made it the 3rd highest grossing movie of all time. So after that kind of success, though, everyone in Hollywood wanted to be in the James Cameron business. This was a guy who dreamed big, but whose ambitions paid off in spectacular ways, both in terms of quality and capital. They made a shit ton of money, and there was no denying that. But after making the biggest movie of all time, Cameron had his eyes on something smaller. You know, he had made 4 sci-fi films in a row, the last 2 of which were some of the most demanding film shoots ever attempted, Terminator 2 and The Abyss. So he understandably wanted a break from that kind of work. So for his next project, he had his eyes on a nonfiction book called The Minds of Billy Milligan, written by Daniel Keyes, the guy who wrote Flowers for Algernon, which I'm sure we're a little more familiar with. The Minds of Billy Milligan is about a rapist in Ohio who suffers from dissociative identity disorder and whose lawyers successfully used his mental illness as a defense for his crimes, which made him the first person in U.S. history to ever be acquitted of a major crime by pleading multiple personality disorder, which is what they referred to it as at the time. Cameron read this book and he found Milligan's story and his long history of childhood abuse that maybe possibly had led to his mental illness to be both moving and intriguing as a cinematic exercise. And he said, quote, to do all those characters and externalize the drama that was playing out in that guy's head would have been as big a challenge in its own way as making The Abyss, which I feel like the people who worked on The Abyss would probably argue that.
Yeah. All that happens in his head, Jim.
Gotta put this guy under.
We don't have to be in a fucking nuclear waste tank or something.
Cameron optioned the rights to Key's book from a New York restaurateur named Sandra Arcara, who was looking to establish herself as a film producer. She owned the rights to this book. She was trying to get into the biz, and this was kind of her gateway into it. So he bought the rights from her. He started working on the script with Todd Graff, who was the actor who played Hippie in The Abyss. He's the one with the pet mouse, you know, Hippie.
Yeah.
And he's got some screenwriting credit as well. So they start working on adapting this book into a screenplay. And their script, which was called The Crowded Room, still has a lot of the visual flourishes that are found in Cameron's sci-fi work. Only this time, the science and set pieces take place inside the main character's mind. If you want to read about, you know, the script to The Crowded Room, there is a James Cameron website called James Cameron Online that has a really good kind of summary of it. I don't think it had the entire script, but it had like excerpts from it and a good summary of the script if you want to know a little bit more about what they were going for on that. But The Crowded Room, at least for James Cameron, was not meant to be. So spring of 1992, this is, you know, a few months after Terminator 2 came out, Cameron signed an unusual multi-picture distribution deal with Fox that basically gave him the power to put any movie he wanted into production without Fox's approval up to a budget of $70 million. And the deal allowed him to retain ownership rights of the copyrights to his own films. That's crazy, for one thing, that he can just basically greenlight any movie he wants as long as the budget doesn't exceed $70 million. And he owns the movie.
Wow.
Yeah. In exchange, Cameron's own production company, Lightstorm Entertainment, would have to shoulder any overhead cost as well as take responsibility for any budget overages, which they had planned on being able to do by selling the foreign distribution rights to the film, because the deal with Fox was only for domestic distribution. So if it went over $70 million, they had to cover that. That's an insanely good deal for a director.
Yeah.
Usually a studio will acquire the worldwide rights to a film. They'll pay for the whole production, or they'll bring in some other outside parties to help finance. But then they own the movie outright. You know, it's their movie. But this deal, and of course, Cameron's dealt with not owning the rights to his own property with the Terminator and, you know, everything that entailed. But this deal with Fox gave Cameron more control and ownership than most directors ever get. But it also gave him a lot more responsibility than most directors ever want, because that's a huge financial responsibility if you end up going over. And as we know from James Cameron, he has a tendency to go over budget.
Yeah, I don't remember if I ever read like how many pictures, you know, it was just saying multi-picture, but I think I read the whole deal was estimated to be like worth like $500 million or something in total.
The Crowded Room, though, was not part of this deal, but it was still in the works with a modest budget. But then after a few days after Cameron's deal with Fox was announced in the trade papers, Sandra Arcara sued Cameron, saying that she'd been cut out of the pre-production process on The Crowded Room, and she refused to finalize the deal unless her fee was increased from $250,000 to $1.5 million. So speaking to the Daily Variety, she said that Cameron it's a quote, is a much more powerful director and has a lot more clout now. He's not the same person he was when I brought him the project. So she's essentially saying that she's taking advantage of Cameron's success by demanding more money. She's like, this guy's worth a lot of money now, so I'm going to ask for more. And to say that in a fucking newspaper is insane.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
like, what the fuck are you doing?
This couldn't go bad at all.
I guess you probably, I don't know, like maybe she's just assuming he's like, oh, I've got way many more millions than that, so I'll just give it to you. But
well, that's not how it worked out. So Cameron dealt with her demands in his typical way, saying, and this is another direct quote from Cameron, I don't negotiate with terrorists or extortionists. So I told her to take a flying fuck and collapse the project.
and she did take that flying fuck.
Yeah. And with that statement, the crowded room was essentially dead. Arcara would take the rights or would take the project to other studios where various director-actor combinations were discussed throughout the years, including David Fincher and Brad Pitt. Steven Soderbergh and Sean Penn, Danny DeVito and Leonardo DiCaprio, Joel Schumacher and Colin Farrell. But none of these projects ever got off the ground. Although there is
that
actually
DeVito reference that I missed earlier in the notes. I'm sorry, guys. I probably did skim the actors and directors there, since none of those matter for the project.
Yeah, but it's interesting. It's an interesting little addendum.
Well, I wasn't trying to
James
knock
Cameron
your notes,
story.
Justin. I apologize. I wasn't saying what you put didn't matter. I was just trying to.
No, he's just knocking my intro, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's more
Okay.
accurate.
All
Fuck
right.
your stupid intro, Todd.
Yeah.
Anyway, there is actually an upcoming Apple TV anthology series called The Crowded Room, whose first season takes inspiration from the minds of Billy Milligan. It's coming from Akiva Goldsman, who, is whatever. Tom Holland is playing the Billy Milligan character, although I think they're giving him a different name. And then Amanda Seyfried and Emmy Rossum are in the lead roles. And I'm not sure, they haven't announced a release date. They announced the series and stuff a while back. But so I guess she finally did get paid for it, 2.5 decades, 3 decades later. So,
hey, listen, we glossed over Akiva Goldsman. Let's not, discount the fact he's mostly responsible for New Trek, which is pretty great.
Yeah,
there's a lot of his stuff that isn't.
Yeah, I was about to say he's got a lot of garbage on his IMDb. I mean,
those things are somebody's favorite.
He did Batman and Robin. He did I, Robot, I Am Legend, the fucking A Beautiful Mind. And like,
you don't like A Beautiful Mind?
No, it's schmaltzy and manipulative, and no, I do not like.
Okay.
Well, and according to as we're recording this, William Shatner was at San Diego Comic-Con just like yesterday, and according to him, New Trek is also garbage. So
yeah, well, when you're William Shatner, you've earned the right to say that.
Yeah,
that's what I said. I was like, he should. He was also still like, the original series is the best one ever. So
of course he's in it.
I'm like, you should say that.
Anyway, so with this small character-based drama no longer happening, Cameron's chance of doing anything other than the kind of big budget extravaganza that Hollywood expected from him also seemed to be dead in the water. He kind of felt an obligation to make his first movie under this historic deal with Fox a highly commercial one. So in the year and a half or so after the release of Terminator 2, Cameron was experiencing his busiest writing period since he had been working on Aliens and Rambo simultaneously. Remember, we talked about that a few episodes ago. But because in addition to The Crowded Room, he was also working on a treatment for a potential Spider-Man movie and a futuristic film noir that he'd had the idea for since the mid-'80s called Strange Days. And Cameron finally started turning the Strange Days treatment or scriptment, which is I think something Gary brought up, that it's kind of this longer novelistic treatment that he writes. He started turning that into a script at the urging of Catherine Bigelow. So you remember Catherine Bigelow and him were married, but it wasn't long after T2 that Cameron and Bigelow divorced, and Cameron kind of stopped trying to hide his relationship with Linda Hamilton from Bigelow and the rest of the world. That the two ended up getting married, and were married for 3 or 4 years, I think. But Cameron and Bigelow remained on good terms despite the affair. Bigelow would eventually end up directing Strange Days, with Cameron serving as the producer. He actually did not end up writing the final screenplay because he got busy on some of these other projects. He handed it off to someone else, but it was based on his story. That film was released in 1995, but audiences didn't connect with it. It brought in like $8 million at the box office on a budget of $42 million. It was a major flop. Have you guys seen Strange Days?
No.
I don't think I ever did see it either.
It's a really good movie, I think, despite that disappointing box office. It's also like a disturbingly prescient film because it depicts a futuristic Los Angeles where remember, this is 1995. Okay. The futuristic LA that it shows, reality shows dominate television programming. And this is in 1995, where the only reality show on TV was Cops. Like, so it wasn't a thing yet. So that's kind of Cameron predicting that. And the story is about an ex-cop who gets his hands on footage of a police beating a black man to death. Yeah. So, again, 1995, granted, the Rodney King thing had already happened at this point, but yeah, it's really good. But it's like you watch it and you're like, oh, Cameron is he like some sort of
He's got some insight.
Wizard?
Yeah.
How is he predicting this stuff? It's really wild because it predicts basically like body cams, although I think they're on their helmets in that. But I would recommend that you watch it if you have a chance. But like several other Cameron movies, it's not streaming and it's only available on an out of print DVD that's going to cost you like $40 or $50 on eBay.
Oh, so, Cameron.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if that it's his fault in this case, but it's just kind of a weird thing. Anyway, sorry for the side tangent on Strange Days, but it's a fun James Cameron movie if you want to watch a little something that he worked on that he actually didn't direct, which doesn't happen very often, especially at this time.
Well, he's done like a couple of producer roles now.
Yeah, he has, and he'll write other scripts way down the line, like Battle Angel, Alita, stuff like that. But at the time, he wasn't really writing movies for anyone other than himself. But over the years, Cameron and Arnold Schwarzenegger, they're friends. We mentioned that earlier. They would get together regularly to ride their motorcycles through the California mountains, or they would meet for breakfast at a restaurant that Schwarzenegger owned, this like German food restaurant that he owned at the time that I think has since closed. But they'd meet for breakfast and they'd chit chat. And at one of these breakfasts, they started kind of talking business. Arnold had just finished filming Last Action Hero with his Predator director, John McTiernan, a movie that had been plagued by bad buzz during the filming and would eventually become one of the summer 1993's biggest box office flops. And Cameron also knew that he kind of needed to come out swinging on his next film since it was his first under that big Fox deal. So they're kind of talking about what their next moves are going to be. Well, Schwarzenegger's brother-in-law, Bobby Shriver, Maria Shriver's brother, had recently shown him a French movie called La Totale, which is a comedy about a secret agent whose family thinks he's a boring old civil servant. Now, I have not seen La Totale. I tried to find it for this episode, but it's kind of hard to find. It's not streaming anywhere, so I wasn't able to watch it. But from what I've read about it, it doesn't sound like it's actually really an action movie outside of a couple of short chase scenes. It's more of a comedy that happens to be in the like spy world. But the potential of the character appealed to Schwarzenegger, which is really interesting to me that Arnold would be attracted to projects like Last Action Hero and this back to back, almost as if he was kind of coming to terms with his own persona and sort of making an attempt to deconstruct it a little bit, because both of those movies kind of do that. It really is interesting I'd be interested to hear what he was thinking at the time, like what exactly attracted him to these two projects back to back. Well, at this breakfast, Arnold had actually brought along a copy of La Totale for Cameron to watch. He gave it to him. Cameron watched it that night, and he was immediately intrigued. And here's what he said about it. I saw the film as an anti-James Bond, a reality check on the uber male fantasy. You might be able to travel the globe and kill all the bad guys in clever ways and save the world from time to time. But as a man, you still had to answer to a woman when you came home. Bond himself is a pathetic eternal bachelor who will never know the truth of what it is to be a man, to be a husband and a father, which is why that fantasy works, especially for married men, because Bond has nobody to answer to. So thinking about La Totale, the crux of that movie for Cameron was, what if James Bond did have to come home and answer to his wife?
Yeah, and he's done such a good job at pretending the whole time. Now his wife's ready to leave him. I thought that was interesting because like James Cameron, you mentioned he's in the relationship with Linda Hamilton at this point, and he's also knocked her up. So like she's about to have a baby. So by the time this is coming out, I think she ends up leaving him in pre-production, and then by the end of the movie, they're back together, because the one of the articles I was reading was talking about like maybe he's autobiographical with this thing, because he had come up with a poster. It was like, even the best relationships have explosions or something. But it was said that he had figured, since he had learned more, he's been divorced 3 times, he had enough experience with marriage to do a film about the burden of family life. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, he saw his version of La Totale as a big action comedy, one done on an epic scale that's not usually seen in the genre. And he would call his version, of course, True Lies.
For 15 years, Harry Tasker's been leading a double life. Now, they're about to collide.
What's your exit strategy?
I'm gonna walk right out of the front gate.
May I see your invitation, please?
Sure. Here's my invitation.
Yeah, that worked good. Right out the old front gate.
Can you lean back a second?
Mr. Tasker's office.
Hi, it's Helen. Is he in?
Harry's in a sales meeting, Mrs. Tasker.
It's not like he's saving the world or anything.
Well, see, this is the problem with terrorists. They're really inconsiderate when it comes to people's schedules. Could you press the button for the top floor, please?
Hi, Helen. Harry forgot something back at the office.
Whenever I can't sleep, I just ask him to tell me about his day. 6 seconds and I'm out.
From James Cameron, director of Aliens and T2. True Lies.
Now, for those of you who, for some reason, have not seen True Lies,
well, it's hard to find.
It's hard to find, so it's understandable. But just know that we are going to get into spoiler territory as we talk about the production and certain aspects of the narrative. So this is your warning. Spoilers abound.
So as usual, Cameron entered the development of True Lies on a time crunch. He's always seems to be slightly behind schedule, even before he starts. Schwarzenegger's representatives were pretty anxious to get his next movie in the works to kind of help resuscitate his image. And by the time that Cameron had finished his treatment for Strange Days, he only had a few weeks to write the True Lies script and kind of lock it all down before Schwarzenegger's people said that he would have to kind of move on to something else. You can't wait forever, Jim, like get us something or we're going to move on. So to help speed up the process on the script, Cameron enlisted his old pal, Randall Frakes, his old college buddy from, if you've listened to this series since the beginning, you know the name Randall Frakes. When they finished their initial draft, Cameron, who didn't have any real experience writing comedies, I wouldn't say any of the movies before this were funny in any way whatsoever. So he was worried that his script wasn't funny enough because he's trying to make a comedy. So he brought in a team of comedy writers to punch up the jokes. But Cameron was kind of unimpressed with the jokes they'd written. He only kept a handful of lines that they'd written, like the "you're fired" line. That was one of the ones that these comedians had come up with. But that's one of the few that he actually. The thing that's one of the best ones that he thought that was one of the best ones to keep. What were the other ones like? I wonder.
Yeah, maybe he just thought that's something Arnold would say.
It does sound like an Arnold line, but why? Yeah. Why is he fired? He doesn't work for you. You're not his boss, so that the joke doesn't work on that level.
Did you see like who they actually got?
No, I couldn't find it. They didn't say any names.
Oh, okay.
I'd be curious who it was.
I'm super curious as to
Bruce Valanche, probably.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah.
All of the 25-year-olds listening to this show are going to have no fucking clue with it.
It's funny. He said he also watched a lot of MTV with the sound off while he was making the movie. I thought that was weird.
Very strange. With the Cold War over, for the years, the bad guys in Hollywood had been Russians. It was easy. They were kind of the catch-all villain in Hollywood. But with the Cold War essentially over, or has it ever been over? Who knows? But Cameron was looking for another kind of villain. He didn't want to put Russians as his bad guys, so he picked a Middle Eastern terror cell operating out of Florida. And while researching the project, Cameron and Frakes got concerned that what they were writing, the villain's plan to sneak nuclear weapons into the country, as they were like researching, they're like, oh, this is a little like maybe too easy to pull off. Like they were worried that it would give people ideas, how to do it. So to kind of combat that, they decided they would make True Lies as silly as possible. Like hugely over the top action scenes that didn't seem realistic at all. They were going for a very like over the top feel for this movie to kind of make to make it seem like everything, including the villain's plan, was preposterous. It's weird because watching it again today, that scene where the main villain gives like a monologue to the camcorder, the guys recording it. Mm-hmm. And that's another kind of prescient piece of writing from Cameron, because this is pre 9/11, this is 8 years before 9/11. Yep. And the idea of a terrorist delivering threats, in a grainy black and white video seemed kind of outrageous. This is not something that people had seen. Now we see it on CNN. Of course, he also plays it for laughs because, the camera runs out, which would be very hard to do now, which we can get into this later. That's a big reason they never made a True Lies 2 is because it's hard to make fun like it was then, maybe, Yeah. So he feels a little uncomfortable with that. But it's weird that at the time, like, that felt like something he was doing that was part of that preposterous, outrageous idea of this movie, is to have this guy delivering this monologue on a camcorder. But now it's like, oh yeah, we've seen that how many times? Yeah. Really weird. So when Cameron was writing True Lies, he already had an actress in mind to play Schwarzenegger's wife. And that was Jamie Lee Curtis. He wanted Jamie Lee Curtis in the role. He had met Curtis through Catherine Bigelow during the filming of Blue Steel, which I think that's the one that she was filming when he was doing The Abyss, and they would go back and visit each other on weekends. Remember that? So that's the movie they were making. And him and Jamie Lee had kind of become friends. The only problem was that Arnold didn't see it. He could not see Jamie Lee Curtis in the role. And True Lies, Arnold brought this idea to Cameron. So this was kind of Arnold's baby. So, and also nobody tells Arnold what to do.
That's what I've heard.
At this point in his career, nobody tells Arnold what to do. But Cameron, he intended to honor Arnold's choice. They were friends. This was kind of Arnold's project that he brought to Cameron. He felt that Schwarzenegger should really have some input into who played the character. And Schwarzenegger just didn't see Jamie Lee in that role. So Cameron begins a 3-month search for an actress to play Helen Trasker. One of whom and I couldn't find out who it was, but there was another actress that was really close to getting it. They even did a screen test with Schwarzenegger and everything.
I saw Jodie Foster was really close in there.
That would be a weird choice, but
she went on to she picked Nell or something at the same time. Yeah.
Hey, that win.
I have a hard time. I love Jodie. I think Jodie Foster is an outstanding actress. I just have a really hard time seeing her in that role.
Oh, way, Harry Tasker.
I feel like Nell might be problematic these days. Is it? I don't know.
The way we're talking about her, yeah.
Thanks to
it's
us.
Just she has her own language. I don't know.
Why would that be?
It's not like a handicap or anything.
Yeah, she wasn't like mentally handicapped. She just had never been around other people or something, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's fine then.
Yeah, so let's make fun of her.
We're gonna make fun of her. Anyway, so one night during this whole casting process, Cameron's in Washington, D.C. He's scouting locations for the movie. He came back to his hotel and he watched A Fish Called Wanda, which is a movie, John Cleese movie that co-stars Jamie Lee Curtis. Really great movie. If you haven't seen A Fish Called Wanda, it's hilarious. And it kind of shows you what kind of comedic chops Jamie Lee Curtis has. And he thought that Jamie Lee Curtis was perfect in the role because it's kind of a dual role. She came across as sexy, but also charming, fun, hilarious. And watching that, he knew that he was right to begin with. Like, she had to play Helen, but he still had to convince Schwarzenegger. So he comes back home to LA. He calls Schwarzenegger, who dropped what he was doing, came over to Cameron's office. The description I read said he came over wearing like bright purple, like bicycle shorts or something. So whatever he was doing, I guess involved working out, or maybe that's just what he hangs out in. Maybe he was auditioning to be the Incredible Hulk. I don't know.
Maybe.
But Cameron asked him, he's like, Arnold, how much do you trust me? Arnold's like, of course, I trust you completely. And he asked him, he's like, no, really, like, how do you trust me? And once he was convinced that Arnold was being sincere, he's like, this has got to be Jamie Lee. She is Helen. This is her role. And Arnold kind of paused for a long time. You can kind of see him clench his jaw, like you see a couple times in this movie where they're showing him in close up. But he didn't say anything. He just said, okay. Like, he knew at this point he had worked with Cameron enough that even though he didn't see it, he trusted that Cameron knew what he was doing. So we're going to talk about the striptease scene. I don't know if you guys remember that scene in the movie.
In this movie?
Yeah, there's a striptease scene in this movie.
Okay. I mean, all right, sure. All right.
You mean
whatever.
the scene that's been cemented in my brain since I was like whatever age I was at this time?
So that strip scene with Jamie Lee Curtis was written differently in Cameron's original script. And in the original script, Helen was to be fully nude, but filmed in silhouettes. You only saw her silhouette. And it was actually Jamie Lee Curtis's idea to film it differently. So one day during pre-production, she came into Cameron's office and she said, okay, I want to do this differently. I want to go down to not fully nude, but just in my bra and panties. But she wants it to be fully lit, but kind of awkward, like played for laughs. Right. So to make her case to Cameron, she took off all her clothes in his office and started performing this kind of klutzy burlesque dance in her underwear in front of Cameron's desk. So he's sitting at his desk. Jamie Lee Curtis is giving him a strip tease in front of him, basically, but playing it for laughs. But yeah, Cameron said that it was that day that I realized how cool my job really was. She's like, all right. He's like, you win, well, Jamie Lee.
I mean,
you're highly convincing.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to gloss over this. Like, I mean, Gary said it, that scene is cemented, and especially guys our age, like that scene is in our brains.
Oh yeah.
For better or for worse, that scene is in our brains, but it's incredibly well shot.
Mm-hmm.
The lighting's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And she nails that.
She's incredible.
Like when it's sexy, it's sexy. When it's funny, it's really funny.
It's really funny.
And to have those two big stars, like you have the biggest star in the world.
Mm-hmm.
He's sitting in a chair in the dark, like,
yeah.
And he doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
And Jamie Lee Curtis is no slouch either, but she's doing this thing so well. She's in this character so deep.
Well, and you see her arrive to that character in the course of the scene, because she starts off a little more awkward, and then she like gets into it. She like feels herself.
Yeah.
And I just think a lot of people could look at this as like an awkward thing, but it's important, like you said. It's played for laughs, and she even petitioned it to Cameron for laughs.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it wasn't. This is not a case of like, this is not Harvey Weinstein. This is like she came in and did this for Cameron, saying, I think this is better. And
well, this is a comedy that they're making, and the scene wasn't written as a funny scene, and she turned it into one. It allowed them to play the scene funnier than it had originally been written. I saw and also like, say what you will, like, and we'll get into people's criticisms of this movie, of it being misogynistic. And whatnot,
they got them.
But this scene to me plays as like very empowering for her. Mm-hmm. Now, how she got there, there's some, we can talk about the problems of how she got into this situation to begin with.
Right.
But for her as a character, like she's feeling sexy in a way that she hasn't felt in a very long time in her marriage, and you see her like come to that realization during the course of the scene. She plays it very, very well.
She's using her power here.
Also very in good shape.
Yeah, she does work out.
Well, the other thing I was just going to cap it off by saying, like, James Cameron, it's no secret he has done some impressive things on film, but in terms of conveying character beats and story with this scene, which has no dialogue, this is incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's the feminist thing we were talking about too, just to throw in there, that everything we've talked about, every movie he's done so far has had powerful female characters. So I don't think there's even any evidence to back that he thinks of women in a way that he would be doing this if he thought it was like belittling to Jamie Lee Curtis to do this film.
Yeah. I mean, the screen was the scene was in the script when she signed on to it, so obviously she knew it was going to be there. And actually, when they blocked out the scene, they, in rehearsals and stuff, they did it while Schwarzenegger was in his trailer, so he actually wasn't in on the gag. He didn't know how the dance was going to go. So when she falls in the middle of the scene, where she's hanging onto the bedpost and falls down, he didn't know that was going to happen. So the moment where you see him like break character and get
out of the chair
and drop the tape recorder.
Yeah, that was Schwarzenegger actually breaking character for a moment. But it works because Harry is also momentarily breaking character, then remembering he's supposed to be this like French weapons dealer.
Yeah.
And so it works really well. But during the filming of the scene, like Arnold actually thought that she had fallen and it was getting up to help her. But he notices quickly that she's still in character because he sits back down quickly and then she pops back up and keeps going. It's really good. It's really good. A really good scene.
Yeah, and Cameron, for as strict and crazy as he is, I mean, even in the final tango that she does, like there's the part where she slides onto the ground, and she said that they had just rehearsed it so many times her legs were tired out, and they gave out on her during the take, and she couldn't get back up. And she was mad at him at first because he decided to keep it, but then she was like, "Oh no, that makes sense for her. Like that works." But. And Arnold, he's a married man at the time. He's got Maria Shriver, for whatever that means to Arnold. You can debate that, I guess.
Well, yeah. But it's not much of a debate. I mean,
in one of the interviews I read with him, they asked her if she was bothered by watching him with the scene where Jamie Lee Curtis is stripping for me. He said that he had to reassure her, "No, honey, I hated every hour I watched her strip."
And Cameron, he was kind of, like we said, he was kind of unsure about the comedy in the script because he's not a comedy writer. So he made it a point to cast actors who were known for being funny, like Jamie Lee Curtis. I mean, she made that scene funny that wasn't originally supposed to be that way. He did that so that even his written jokes, if they didn't work, he could fall back on these actors doing some improvisational jokes, and maybe those would work better than what he's written.
Oh yeah.
So another one of the people that he hired for that very reason was Tom Arnold. So Tom Arnold at the time was a stand-up comic and he was a sitcom writer. He wrote on Roseanne. He was mostly known at the time as being the husband of Roseanne and then of Roseanne Barr. And he had a recurring character on that show. But he had very, very little experience on the big screen other than like one or two very small like walk-on roles. But somehow his agent got him an audition with James Cameron. Schwarzenegger comes in to read with Arnold. Their chemistry was really great. Arnold's kind of manic performance played really well against Arnold's more brooding, serious performance. But Fox actually hated the idea of Tom Arnold in the role because of his baggage. Like he was just seen as being like attached so closely to Roseanne Barr. Like people didn't talk about Tom Arnold without talking about Roseanne. So they felt like that was a lot of baggage, and they're not wrong in that. But because Tom Arnold was basically a human punchline at the time, and not in a good way. Like,
no.
But Cameron stood by his choice and told the studio if they didn't approve the casting, he would take his film elsewhere. That's what he told him. For Tom fucking Arnold, he's willing to walk off. Now, it could be a thing like with the Sigourney Weaver contract negotiation where he was bluffing, but it worked and he got his way and Tom Arnold got cast in the movie.
Well, I was going to say, he didn't even expect to get a role. Like Tom Arnold just wanted to meet James Cameron from everything I read. He did those scenes and Cameron just thought they had real chemistry. He said the one that he said they were talking after the audition. And Tom Arnold jokingly said about Schwarzenegger, like, he's not that big. I think I could take him.
Yeah, I think that's what got him the role.
And that amused Cameron so much that he was like, all right, this is my guy. And like you said, they were going to pull it, but he threatened them. And I think they've like been friends ever since. There's even stuff in there because Tom Arnold's going through the divorce with Roseanne Barr at this time, I think. And although he's still working on the show.
He's still working on the show, yeah.
Yeah, and that scene where he tells the story about his second wife taking everything when she left him in the ice cube trays from the freezer, that's a direct reference to his divorce with Roseanne Barr. And Cameron says that they were having a conversation, and he said that Tom Arnold told him about she took my fucking ice cube trays. What kind of sick bitch takes the ice cube trays out of the freezer? And Cameron thought that was so funny, he put it in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Tom Arnold's dialogue in this is improvised. It feels improvised. Like when he walks in and sees Harry's daughter and she's wearing the motorcycle helmet, he's like, I remember my first time being shot out of a cannon. Like that. There's no way James Cameron wrote that line. Like that's a Tom Arnold line.
Yeah, and it's great too.
It's great, and he's funny in this. And I do not like. I mean, Tom Arnold is not great in most everything else. Like he's not funny. He's annoying in about everything. This is easily the best thing Tom Arnold's ever done. That's not a huge bar to clear, but I think he works in this.
There's an earnestness about his character in this. Like he doesn't seem like,
oh man, Jim Varney would have been good in the role too.
You should have said that.
We're gonna kill some terrorists. We're gonna kill some terrorists. You know what I mean?
I'm just
who else would you have cast?
Sitting in the truck and like giving instruction to Harry and then turning towards the camera and like, know what I mean, Vern?
Who else would you have cast in that role if Tom Arnold hadn't got it? Who else is a good like movie, like 90s action movie sidekick? And don't say Rob Schneider.
It would have been. I was leaning more. You have to have like, was Chris Rock doing anything during this time?
What about Sinbad?
Sinbad would have been it. You might as well have just kept the duo.
Oh my God, that's perfect.
Arnold and Sinbad.
Arnold and Sinbad.
What The Rock and Kevin Hart are now.
Yep.
Yes.
Just made a series of movies. Anyway, where were we? Oh, the casting. So the rest of the cast was filled with, of course, James Cameron's old buddy Bill Paxton in Bill Paxton's finest role. I'll say that on record. It's my favorite thing Bill Paxton's ever done is Simon. Every line that he says cracks me up. Every single thing he says in this movie. I love him. He's so good. You had Art Malik as the villain. I think his name's Aziz, right? And Art Malik, I have not seen in a lot of stuff. He's Pakistani-born British actor. He was, however, in The Living Daylights, the James Bond movie with Timothy Dalton, which I think is highly underrated as a James Bond movie. He's a good guy in that, though. He's a Mujahideen fighter who teams up with James Bond to fight the Soviets, I think. You had Eliza Dushku as Schwarzenegger and Curtis's daughter in one of her very early roles, and Tia Carrere as kind of a secondary villain. We all know who Tia Carrere is because we've all seen Wayne's World.
Yes. Two women I've loved at one point in my life.
Eliza.
Yeah, Eliza and
Tia and Jamie Lee.
Yeah, and Jamie. Yeah, I mean, this is just full of. if you were growing up through the '90s, like you just would have been in love with some of these people. You didn't mention Charlton Heston.
Oh, I didn't, did I? What's his name? Spencer Trilby or something?
Yeah,
like
that? yeah.
I've seen two origins for his character. I don't know why I cared, but
because why does he have an eye patch for one thing? Why would you care?
So glad you asked. According to one story, it was because Cameron had originally wanted to be involved in comic books and was a fan of Nick Fury.
Well, that makes sense. He was working on a Spider-Man movie.
And then he was supposed to be Nick Fury in this. But according to another story, Charlton Heston had pink eye that day.
And, on like the first day, or was he only there to film for one day?
I don't. It just said. It said literally this thing I clipped out of an article said it was not originally planned to have an eye patch. He arrived on the first day of filming with pink eye, and the costume department swiftly fixed the problem.
But he's got prosthetics on his face too because he's got scarring.
Yeah.
So they would have had to create. That. Yeah. So I think that's
good
bullshit.
Point. Good point.
Why is it
said also
tiny
his character was named Trilby because that was his favorite hat.
I was wondering why he was named Trilby, like his cousin is like Jeff Fedora. Anyway, Todd, tell us if anyone involved in this, any of these cast members happen to appear in
Star Trek?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we've got quite a few of them now. Normally we've got some pretty big name players when we talk about these, but here on Cinema Shock, we give credit where credit's due. I've got 7 names here. What? Excuse me, 7. 7 names here. 6 of them are in uncredited roles in True Lies, but they are there, and they were also in Star Trek. So let's get started with Manny Perry, who plays a bass player, uncredited. He did
maybe when Arnold's running past
there's a lot of people in those. Yeah, a lot of people in those.
There's a band playing here.
Yeah,
the jazz band.
But he was also in Star Trek First Contact in 1996, directed by Jonathan Frakes. He did some stunt work in that. And then we have Richard Givens, who plays a Nigerian general, which is probably either in the opening scene or in the closing credits scene.
Yeah.
But he was in Star Trek Insurrection in 1998 as Operations Division Ensign, also uncredited. Elliot Durant III, who plays the hotel concierge, uncredited, was in 26 episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation from 1990 to 1994 as a Starfleet ensign. That's just how he's credited.
He's a red shirt.
Yeah, he's a red shirt, basically.
And you said through 94, so this is like peak. He graduated from ensign to
he
basically
graduated.
Like, sorry, I got to ditch Star Trek for a minute to do True Lies.
Yeah. Well, he was also in an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It was season 7, episode 2, Shadows and Symbols. That was in 1998 as a Bajoran officer, uncredited. And then we've got Max Daniels, who is one of the bathroom terrorists, uncredited. Did some stunt work in Star Trek Nemesis in 2002, and also Star Trek Into Darkness in 2013, where he was uncredited for his stunt performance in that movie. Then we have Lauren James. He plays the man in the elevator, and I believe that's the gentleman who says, "That's a fine animal."
Yeah, the old guy.
He's uncredited in this, but he was actually in 2 episodes of Star Trek, the original series.
Wow.
Season 1, episode 2, Charlie X. He was the stunt double for William Shatner.
Whoa, what?
Yeah.
That's cool.
And then he appears again in season 2, episode 8, I Mud. That was in 1967.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, he was the stunt double for Richard Totoro, also uncredited. And then finally, we have Armin Sajikian. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think the first K is silent. He is Juno Skinner's limo driver.
The one that gets shot in the head?
The one who gets shot in the head. Now, this was interesting because he was in Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home in 1986. He's also in Star Trek Beyond in 2016. And I would have never pinned this for him. He was in those movies as part of the orchestra, as part of the score for.
Wait, so he was a musician, not on screen.
Yeah, he was not on screen. He plays the cello. Now, the interesting thing about him when it comes to True Lies is, of course, when he's driving across the bridge from the Florida Keys to the mainland of Florida, he gets shot in the back of the head and dies. The music that is playing when he dies was played by himself. He actually scored his own death.
What is his name again?
Armin Sajikian. It's Sajikian.
Interesting. I got to look this guy up. Wow,
it's a fun story. Yeah.
Wow, he was in the music department on Jurassic Park and Battle Angel Alita. Battle Angel, which is
that guy on the show.
His resume is impressive.
This is the guy with the like big curly hair and the beard. That and like every time I looked at him watching it the first time, I was like, that looks like somebody like in prosthetics, like they're going to do like a Mission Impossible, like do this, and it's really Tom Arnold under there.
Yeah,
like there's something about him that just looks like this. Oh, that's not a real person.
Yeah,
yeah, interesting.
But yeah,
that's fun.
I thought that was really, really fascinating. A really interesting story. So
that's really cool. Well, thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
You got to say,
and that's everybody from Star Trek.
Yeah, it's not officially over until you do that.
Yeah.
So after being involved in 2 films back to back that had been seen as milestones in the new world of digital effects, James Cameron believed that the world of movie special effects was truly headed in a new direction, and he intended to be on the forefront of the CGI revolution. This is not a guy who's going to let this pass him by. So to do so, he thought he might just need a special effects house of his own. So while he's kind of thinking about this, he's considering this. He visited his friend Stan Winston's studio. Winston, who he had done several previous James Cameron movies, all the way back to the Terminator. Actually, had done everything. He was a master of old school practical effects, creature effects, things like that. But he had found himself involved in another milestone of digital effects when he did Jurassic Park. And he felt that the future of special effects would be done as much digitally as they were done with prosthetics and animatronics. And he thought maybe CGI could actually replace the type of effects that he had made his name creating. So seeing the direction of the future, Winston had actually installed 10 workstations with CG modeling software at his studios, at Stan Winston Studios, with artists creating CGI creatures for him. So he was kind of already working on this. He knew that this was the direction that the industry was going. So Cameron's talking to him, and he pitched to Winston the idea that instead of 10 workstations, what if you had 200 of these, staffed by some of the best artists in the world? Wow. Cameron was sold on the idea, and he joined Cameron as the co-founder of their new special effects company, which they called Digital Domain.
That name, by the way, he got based on an idea. He was driving in his car, and he said, "We need to domesticate the highfalutin digital effect." That's a quote. You're talking about Jurassic Park, but he said so that even it can help out realism-oriented filmmakers. Mm-hmm. Basically, in one interview I was reading with him, he was saying that basically if you want a house in the middle of the cornfield, you can just grow the corn on the computer. You just need the house.
Well, as it turns out, getting funding for a digital effects company from the guys who brought you Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park proved to be pretty easy. Cameron recruited Scott Ross, who had overseen ILM during Terminator 2. Cameron recruited him to run the day-to-day at Digital Domain, and the company would very quickly become the number 2 digital effects house in the world, right behind ILM. But their very first film would be True Lies.
Scott Ross says that Cameron pitched it to him, and Ross said, "Computers can't do that." And Cameron said, "I know, we're going to make it happen."
That's always Cameron's go-to. Don't tell me.
He's
don't
like,
say,
all right, fine.
The word "can't" is not in James Cameron's vocabulary.
It really is not.
It's not. If it doesn't exist yet, he's going to figure out a way to make it happen.
Yep.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, he found funding. Like IBM went all in on this.
Yeah,
and pitched in the money for it.
There is another person we need to talk about here, and that's Ray Sancini, a woman named Ray Sancini. So Sancini and Cameron, they first met when if you remember on, I think it was our Terminator 2 episode. Yeah. Cameron was getting on the Carolco jet on his way to the Cannes Film Festival in 1990. Remember where he had they had been waiting on him for 20 minutes. He plucked his script out of the printer and ran to the plane. Well, she was on that plane. She was actually an executive at Carolco at the time, who had the task of escorting Cameron after the festival from France to Carolco's studio in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is where it used to be Dino De Laurentiis' studio. I think that's where Dawson's Creek got filmed, Ninja Turtles, all kinds of stuff. But because Carolco wanted him to look at this place as a possible filming location for Terminator 2. So after their flight was delayed, the two ended up experiencing, I read about this in that The Futurist, the Rebecca Keegan book. They started experiencing what Keegan called an upscale version of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which involved them flying on 5 airplanes, one of which was the Concorde, and a couple of very long cab rides. About an hour into this journey, though, Cameron turns to Sancini and confesses that he has no intention of filming in North Carolina, having hated his experience filming in the South when he made The Abyss, which I blame on. I got to blame the Gaffney goats,
That's it. Those damn Gaffney
street
goats.
gang, still wreaking havoc to this day.
Why do we not have merch with the Gaffney goats?
Gaffney goats.
That's a good idea. That's quality.
He was basically just humoring the folks from Carolco, by doing this, which is hilarious because there's no telling what it costs to get on all those flights and everything. But the trip wasn't a complete bust because the two, him and Sancini, they hit it off and they became friends. So a couple of years later, Cameron hired Sancini to help him put together the financing for Digital Domain when he and Winston were kind of trying to get it off the ground. And she ultimately raised $15 million from IBM, who took a 50% stake in the company and provided most of the hardware for them to get it started as well. So fast forward a little bit to the pre-production on True Lies. Now, first, a little bit of a caveat, I would say. I don't like to talk a ton about the financial side of making movies. We talk about what they cost and things like that, but the idea of how funds are raised and things like that, we'll mention it when it's relevant to the story, but we prefer, or at least I prefer, to mostly discuss the creative stuff because that's quite frankly just more interesting to me. Financial deals can be boring when you start talking about them. And often they're very, very complex. Like Hollywood accounting is very complex, but sometimes they are integral to how the story, to the story of how the film gets made, right? And that's the case with this as well, with True Lies. As I mentioned earlier, that part about how, Lightstorm had planned to cover the overhead costs on the films they produced for Fox by selling the foreign distribution rights, which is a great plan if it's executed correctly. Unfortunately, on True Lies, it was not executed correctly. The flaw was that the way the financing was planned on True Lies, none of the funding from Fox or any of Lightstorm's foreign partners on the film would kick in until there was a completion bond in place, which is basically a written contract that guarantees that a movie will be delivered on time and within budget. But there weren't any bond companies that would cover True Lies without a detailed budget. So what this basically means is that Cameron needed to be far enough into pre-production, having bought the rights to the story and hired the actors in order to have the bond issued. But if the funding is based on the bond and the bond is based on work that requires funding, the project can't move forward. It's a catch-22, like he's stuck. So in short, Cameron's team at Lightstorm had fucked up royally. They should have secured equity financing first before selling off the distribution rights. And instead, they did it kind of backwards, meaning that Cameron was now committed to make a movie with one of the biggest stars in the world, and he had no money to do it, and he had nothing to sell that would help him raise the money. So what does he do? He fires someone. He fires Lawrence Kasanoff. Kasanoff was the producer that he put in charge of Lightstorm when he founded the company, and Kasanoff had been the architect of the bum financing deal. So he gets rid of Kasanoff, and he asked Ray Sancini to sort out this mess for him because he was impressed with the way she had handled raising the funds to get Digital Domain off the ground. So the first person that Sancini goes to is Peter Chernin. Peter Chernin is the new head of Fox. He's the guy who had replaced Joe Roth when he left Fox to go work for Disney. I think we mentioned that in our Terminator 2 episode. But remember, though, Fox was originally committed to only a portion of True Lies' budget. But Cameron and Sancini convinced Chernin to be the film's primary financer, which did away with the need for a completion bond because they didn't have all these other companies they're having to work through. But in exchange, the studio took over worldwide distribution rights for True Lies and 2 of Cameron's future films. They had first look at his next 2 films. Those 2 films ended up being Titanic and Avatar, so I'd say the deal worked out pretty well for them. And this ended up being the beginning of a very long and lucrative relationship between Cameron and Chernin. The 2 got along really well. If you read quotes from Peter Chernin, he's like, yeah, Cameron, I like him because he's smart and he doesn't bullshit you, which is rare in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So after this mess is all sorted out, Sancini stepped in as the new president of Lightstorm, and the company reverted to a more traditional production company model, which is where, in the case of a filmmaker-led company, they're relying on a studio to finance their films. Here's how Cameron describes it. Quote, "It's a comfortable arrangement that works like this. I propose a movie which they know will cost a lot. They whinge and cry that it's cost too much, but they say yes because we made money all the previous times. Then I make the film and they whinge and cry and say it's never going to make any money, and then it does, and then we start the process all over again," which is a pretty good way to describe his entire career.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I saw something with like John Landau, Fox's senior vice president of feature production at the time. He was just like, he did say Cameron was very good about once they were through with the logistical discussions that they knew that they weren't on schedule anymore. So he was ready for that. Jamie Lee Curtis, actually, in an interview I was reading, said that what was cool about it is the actors were just prepared. She said, quote, "When you make a deal with Jim's company, they don't hire you with an out date." She said, "It was made very clear to me in an unspoken way that you should not make plans for a last day of the movie."
Yeah. Don't go ahead and book your next movie quite yet. Yeah. Well, filming on True Lies began in August of 1993 in Santa Clarita, California. The first action sequence on the schedule was the bathroom shootout. That's one of the smaller scaled action scenes in the film. And it took less than half a page of script and was budgeted to take 1 day to shoot. So exactly a couple days, 2 days before the crew was set to film the scene, Cameron walks onto the set, and he felt that the set was a little too small. He wanted a bathroom 3 times as big, and he wanted it rigged so that there would be water spraying everywhere and lights strobing. But unfortunately, this was the first time that anyone on the crew was hearing of this, and it required the entire set to be redesigned and rebuilt. And this is something we've mentioned before, where Cameron always has these great ideas and sort of expects everyone to already know, like they read his mind. I feel like he's maybe sometimes not the best communicator to his crew of what his ideas are.
He knows, and so you've just got to like go in trusting him.
Yeah, but he doesn't tell you ahead of time all the time, you know. But once they did start shooting, the bathroom scene, which was again slated for one day, took 5 days to film, which kind of set a precedent for the rest of the shoot, not to mention every other movie that James Cameron's going to make after this. One of the new additions to Cameron's crew on True Lies was a cinematographer named Russell Carpenter. They had actually met back when Cameron was interviewing potential DPs for The Crowded Room, because he was going to shoot that on a small budget. He wanted a non-union guy because it was going to be a small budget, and that's where they originally met. Carpenter, he'd been in the business for a few years at this point, but if you look at his filmography, he's mostly working on lower budgeted genre movies like Critters 2. His biggest claim to fame before True Lies was probably The Lawnmower Man, Pet Sematary 2, or John Woo's Hard Target. Those were probably the three biggest movies he had made before this, none of which are like huge blockbusters.
No, but they're fun.
They're fun. I mean, yeah they're fun. But he and Cameron got along really well. But once he settled in, he was subject to the same merciless management style that the rest of the crew endured. One of those days came when they were screening the dailies, at the end of the day. They were watching a scene where Schwarzenegger returns home and looks at himself in the mirror. And when the scene came up, his reflection was too dark. Carpenter, he makes a note for himself to lighten it up in the photo lab. But when he looked over at Cameron was like, had his head in his hands, like shaking his head. This happens throughout this screening. Cameron says, "I've got the highest paid actor in this or any parallel universe, and I can't see his eyes." So after this happens a few times, a few other shots go by, Cameron is visibly getting angrier and angrier about what he's seeing. And he just screams, "Where did you learn to read a light meter?" Well, Carpenter thinks like, "Oh, I'm fucked." Like this guy hates me. I'm going to lose my job. He goes outside, calls his wife, tells her that, "Hey, I think I'm going to be fired. I think this is the last day of this job." He's like pacing around the parking lot, and he looks over, and there's a few other Cameron regulars, like members of the crew, watching him, and they're laughing. And he's like, "Well, what the fuck, man? I'm about to get fired, and these guys are laughing at me." But they told him he walked over to him, and they tell him, they're like, "He does this to everybody. Every cinematographer who's ever worked for him have gone through this."
There's some people that are like this, by the way. I will not name names, but I have literally heard owners of companies. I have had one that I may or may not have a relationship with literally tell me, "Sometimes I want to make people eat shit for a minute just to see how they're going to handle it."
Yeah, see how they work under pressure.
Yeah. And to see if they're going to be a diva about it, and to see if they're going to be a prick, and to see how their attitude is, if they're going to try to work harder or if they're going to be like bitchy. And so I guess that's a thing.
That's a management style.
Yeah.
Well, Russell Carpenter actually called Michael Solomon, the guy who'd been Cameron's DP on The Abyss. He wanted to see if this was true, that every cinematographer was treated this way, and he knew Michael Solomon. And Solomon said, "Did he use the line, 'Where did you learn to read a light meter?'" That's when Carpenter knew that that working for this guy was going to be an endurance test. Like he was in for a ride, but he didn't get fired. I think Gary mentioned it on the last episode. Like Cameron doesn't fire guys. He doesn't.
You're
fire
going to suffer through till the end.
In fact, Russell Carpenter's actually going to return to work for Cameron on Titanic, for which he's going to win an Oscar. And he's also currently serving as the director of photography on Avatar 2 and 3. So the two clearly have continued this business relationship together. But it was a rocky start. One of the biggest action set pieces in True Lies comes in its third act, at the very end of the movie, where Schwarzenegger's character flies a Harrier jet hovering near a Miami skyscraper. To convincingly pull this off, Cameron recruited John Bruno, who was the special effects supervisor who had won an Oscar for The Abyss. John Bruno, we've mentioned him, I think, a couple times on this series so far. So the production had actually managed to talk the U.S. military into letting them borrow some actual Harrier jets. Because those flybys you've seen where the jets fly by or going by that bridge, those are real Harrier jets. That's not CGI. Yeah. Those are real jets from the U.S. military. But they also use those Harrier jets to create a full-size mock-up out of fiberglass. They figured to pull this off, they would have to mount their mock-up jet on some kind of motion base using a green screen background so that they could safely shoot. We've got Schwarzenegger in the cockpit while Eliza Dushku, who's playing his daughter, she's strapped to it, hanging on the outside of the jet. Obviously, you can't do this on a real jet. And then that while they were filming some of the test footage, John Bruno made a sort of insane suggestion, and that was, why not put the plane and its base, that motion base, on the roof of a real skyscraper instead of in front of a green screen? Well, this would mean putting the biggest movie star in the world and his 12-year-old co-star in a fiberglass model of a jet on top of an aviation gimbal, 300 feet in the air in the middle of a major U.S. city. Which is crazy. But this is James Cameron you're talking to. James Cameron likes doing crazy things. Sometimes he likes doing crazy things, I think, not because he has to, because he could very much shoot a lot of this on a green screen and it would look just fine. He does it because he thinks it's going to look cool.
Yeah.
Or that it's going to be cool to film. Like, this is going to be fun, That's why he does some of this shit. So he starts thinking about this and he likes the idea more and more the more he thought about it. It would eliminate the need for a green screen, but it would also add a new level of realism to the scene. Plus, it's going to be really fun. Like, we're on top of a skyscraper, we're hanging this thing from a crane. It's going to be rad. Like that. That's like the adrenaline junkie in him getting off on that. So to pull this off, they found a building that was under construction that had a giant crane next to it. They built a rig to hang a camera crane under the construction crane, which would allow them to position the camera anywhere they wanted around the plane. And then the crane could even be in the shots because the building that they're using in the story is also under construction. So it works out. So you don't have to worry about the crane being there because it's supposed to be there.
Yep.
So once they were done shooting with the jet mock-up, the crew took it off its base and they were using the big crane to lift it down to the street. And Cameron, he's like having his lunch break or something. He's watching the crew do this and he's got an idea. He's like, I wonder if we could just strap the stunt doubles onto the mock-up of the Harrier jet and dangle it off the side of the building, spin it around with some taglines, shoot it from a helicopter, and then we'll take the lines out with digitally later on.
That's stuff I think about at lunch.
That's what an insane thing to think about on a whim. This is a typical James Cameron thing. Man, that would be cool if we did that. Let's do it. Let's fucking do it. He does stuff like this. He does stuff because he thinks it's going to be cool. We didn't mention it, but during Terminator 2, when they were filming the Miles Dyson house scene, the windows were rigged to explode. Like when the bullets go through them, they explode. So they were rigged to explode. And one time while they were filming that scene, they weren't even filming. It was in between takes. And Cameron just decided to hit a button and detonate all the windows because he thought it would be cool. He thought it would look cool. So he just exploded all the windows. So they had to replace them all because they weren't shooting or anything. He was I just wanted to see what happened, man.
Yeah. I just wanted to see it.
And this blows people's mind around him, by the way, because I even, with Jamie Lee Curtis, reading stuff about how, she wasn't even sure. She had heard stories, but the first little bit of shooting on this movie was just the domestic stuff, in the house. There was a heat wave going through Santa Clarita or something. And so they filmed a lot of the marriage stuff, them in the house. And so she was like, oh, this is cool. I get to know Arnold a little bit. Yeah. And, whatever. And so we build it up. And then the action starts. She's and then it goes ape shit. And then she talks about that scene you were just talking about with the Harrier on the building. And then actually, I've got the quote here. She said, the first time I saw that, my jaw dropped. It's a real Harrier jet. It's mounted on top of this hydraulic on a real building. It looked like an upside down spider with all these legs moving up and down. And they were up there for 3 weeks with every piece of equipment, a techno crane, a linear arm, a power pad. This is outrageous and it's flawless. And so she's just like, what the fuck is happening?
It's another day on our James Cameron set.
Yeah.
So after he has this idea to shoot the Harrier mock-up literally dangling from the movie with his actors on it, he canceled the rest of what he had planned to shoot that afternoon. He ran to the helicopter while the stunt guys start putting on their rigging and start preparing for the stunt. And within an hour, the lead villain stunt double was crawling around on the Harrier jet 30 stories above the ground in Miami.
Jeez.
So then he had his helicopter pilot, Chuck Tamburo. This is the same guy who piloted the helicopter in the chase scene at the end of Terminator 2, remember? Goes under the overpass and over the overpass. That's his helicopter pilot on here. He's the aerial coordinator, I think is his official title on the film. So Chuck Tamburo, he flew Cameron, who was operating the camera, around the dangling jet, kind of in like tight circles. You know, they're going around it. Cameron's got the camera on his shoulder, shooting it himself. And that's an incredible piece of footage, I think. I think it is one of the coolest shots in the movie and the entire sequence. Rewatching it today, I rewatched it today after knowing how they shot it, and it's very impressive, you know. But it's also one of the many reasons that Cameron's film was getting behind schedule and over budget, because he's doing shit like this on a whim, which requires a lot of preparation and a lot of moving parts, you know. So the movie's already over budget. It's way over schedule. Roseanne Barr's calling the set saying, she's wanting Tom Arnold to come back and work on the show. So she's calling, asking for him. It goes on so long that Bill Paxton was actually able to film his scenes and then go off and shoot an entire other movie before returning to True Lies for more work. Well, after shooting in Miami, the film moves on to the Florida Keys, which is where they filmed the most ambitious action scene in the film, which actually in the film takes place before the skyscraper thing. But it's the helicopter chase on the 7 Mile Bridge, where Curtis's character has to be pulled up from the roof of a speeding limo and dangled over the water. And that scene, it's a massive undertaking. And it's honestly, like, even watching it again today, like, this is one of the most insane movie stunts I have ever seen. Knowing that it's really happening is insane. You know, it required the helicopters, two helicopters, to fly low and close. And Cameron also wanted 2 cameras on the helicopter, so you can shoot from different angles, you know. And Tamburo, the pilot, wanted a co-pilot in the cockpit because the path that Cameron wanted was so precise. And because, of course, the flight included yanking a stunt woman through the roof of a limo just before the car plunges off a bridge at 70 miles an hour. This is a very, it has to be incredibly precise. So he wanted a co-pilot there helping him, which, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But with 2 pilots and 2 camera operators, there's no room left for Cameron in the helicopter, but Cameron's not going to miss out on all the fun. So he actually bribed one of the cameramen to sit on a picnic table on the ground during the scene, and Cameron operated that guy's camera mount.
Oh, wow.
Curtis's stunt double in this scene was a woman named Donna Keegan, who has a very impressive resume. If you look at it, she's worked on films like RoboCop, Army of Darkness, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Like her resume goes on a mile long, and she's worked on some incredible stuff. Like one of the most impressive stunt people, like, resumes I've ever seen.
Nice.
Watching the scene from the ground, Curtis, she wanted in on the fun too, They needed a shot of her dangling over the burning wreckage where, Arnold's holding her arm. She's hanging from the helicopter and they fly over where the limo has crashed. It's a great shot. And Cameron had planned to get that in a studio with Curtis in front of a green screen, because you're not going to dangle your leading lady from a helicopter, right? But Curtis,
I know where this is going.
But Curtis sees this happening, and she asked if she could do it. She wanted to fly. She wanted to dangle from the helicopter for her close-up. So Cameron's like, "Hey, if you do it, I'll do it." So they rigged Curtis with a body harness to the helicopter, and Cameron was actually cabled to the airframe of the helicopter. And he stood up. He's standing on the skids of the helicopter, leaning out at a 50-degree angle so that he can shoot downward, handheld, holding the camera on his shoulder. So, and if Jamie Lee Curtis actually posted a picture of this on her, I want to say it was on her Facebook. It might be on her Instagram too. Just not actually within the last couple of weeks, because the movie just had its 28th anniversary or whatever.
Oh wow!
So she posted a picture of her shooting this scene, but from the ground where somebody had taken a picture. And you can see James Cameron is leaning way over and like shooting straight down as she's hanging onto the stunt guy's arm. And that's really Jamie Lee Curtis doing that. you know, as a helicopter's flying. Granted, she's strapped into a harnessing rig, but that's still incredibly dangerous for a movie star to do, and for a director to be literally hanging off the side of a helicopter. To where, like, if his harness at such an angle to where if it wasn't for his harness or his harness broke, he's going to plunge, 80 feet or whatever it is to the water below.
Yeah. She said, according to Jamie Lee, he mentioned it to her, but
I'm going by her recollection in that recent Facebook post. So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, this one interview, she said Cameron asked her to do it, and she said, "Will you be there?" And he said, "I'll be shooting you." And so they went up, and again, like we talk about different stories like over time.
Almost 30 years ago,
yeah. But she says that we were there hanging out a helicopter door with nothing but 7 Mile bridge and lots of water and manta rays underneath us.
Yeah, she said she saw manta rays, and she talks about it in retrospect like it was like thrilling. But Cameron also says like her screams, like when she's screaming in that scene, it's a very quick shot. But he's like, I'm not sure how much acting was going on there.
Yeah, I mean. And of course, as they got closer and closer to the finish of the movie, Cameron got worse and worse, or more and more Cameron. Everybody says he was like on loudspeakers, ordering people around and stuff. This has been a thing I've heard about him. Like as you go on, like he speaks on loudspeakers and talks to the cast and stuff.
He got used to that during The Abyss when he had a PA system that nobody else could use but himself.
Right. His nickname on the set was apparently Mr. Microphone. Tom Arnold said, if you make a mistake, you will hear about it loudly and in a very direct manner.
Loudly and publicly.
Yeah. Apparently he was even under Arnold's skin during part of this too. Like one day Arnold said he was James Cameron said that anyone who goes to the bathroom could just keep walking and never come back.
I mean, that's rude. What if you have to pee?
And Arnold said that's over the top.
Yeah.
He said, I know that he would rather pee in his pants than leave when scenes are clicking, but electricians don't feel as dedicated to their jobs. As this guy does. But he tells another story too, that it's like inspiring. He said, a quote from Arnold is like, there's one scene that blew me away about the guy. There was a particular action scene that required a weapon to be fired in a very tight area. I asked Jim about it, and he said, you're right. Let's find out if that's safe. And he gets in the area and has the weapons guy fire it past his face a couple of times.
Jesus.
He said, the fact is, he has balls, man. He'll do anything.
He'll do it. He will. So in that scene that Curtis is filming, hanging from the helicopter, the guy doubling that's not Arnold Schwarzenegger in that scene, the guy hanging from the skids of the helicopter, by one leg and one arm. Believe it or not, they didn't let Arnold Schwarzenegger do that. So the guy who's doing it is a guy named Joel Kramer, who's the film stunt coordinator. He had previously been, he's done a lot of stuff with Schwarzenegger. But prior to this, he had been Schwarzenegger stunt double in several films, including listen to this list: Commando, Raw Deal, Predator, The Running Man, Red Heat, Twins, Total Recall, Kindergarten Cop, Terminator 2, and Last Action Hero. So he's been working with almost everything that Schwarzenegger's done for like the last decade. And we didn't discuss
Not
Kramer.
a bad resume.
Yeah, pretty impressive. We didn't discuss Kramer a whole lot during our T2 episode, except that you did mention him during your Star Trek bit because he had done some stunt work on Discovery. And his career, if you look at it, it is truly legendary. He's worked on some of the best action films of the last 40 years, but any discussion of him does now come with a bit of a caveat. In January of 2018, so not that long ago, Elisa Dushku wrote a very lengthy Facebook post, which you can still read online, where she alleged that Joel Kramer had sexually abused her during the filming of True Lies. She was 12 years old. He was 36 years old. I'm not going to go into the details. You can read her account online. It is truly disgusting what she's saying that he did. And she did tell her parents. She told her older brother, and she told a couple of adult friends who she trusted about the incident. And then one day while visiting the set, one of those adult friends actually confronted Kramer about it on set. And then later that same day, Dushku was injured in a stunt gone wrong on the Harrier jet, which resulted in several broken ribs. Now, keep in mind that Kramer, as the stunt coordinator, is directly responsible for her safety. And this happens literally the day that he finds out that she's told somebody about this. Kramer, of course, denied the allegations, as these type of dudes usually do. Though I cannot imagine what Dushku could possibly hope to gain by making up a story like this, like 25 years later. Like, why would she make that up? It doesn't make any sense. And Jamie Lee Curtis has said that she was aware of it several years before Dushku came out publicly about it. That she had confided in her a few years ago. Cameron says that he was never made aware of the incident at the time, but that had he known about it, quote, there would have been no mercy. And I feel like, coming from James Cameron, that's probably pretty true. Remember, he's got his first kid by this time. So, like, you know,
at the time of the interview you're talking about, he said, now, especially when I have daughters, there is no mercy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I know that's not a fun part of the story of the making of True Lies, you know, but I don't think that we can ignore it. We can't overlook it. It is part of what happened on the set of this. And we do often like to praise stunt performers on the show because we think that they rarely get the credit that they deserve. But you can't praise Joel Kramer's work without also pointing out his abhorrent behavior during the filming of this movie. It's disgusting. He apparently referred to her as like jail bait openly. It's really gross, like incredibly gross if you go read her account of it. But I just felt like I hate that story even exists. But if we're going to really get into all the, you know, warts and all accounts of the making of these movies, we can't ignore shit like that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fair. And what's sad about it is, I mean, not for him, I guess. He's
that guy.
But I think both of them, I haven't seen anything out of them since like 2017. Like they're both haven't been doing anything,
including her. I'm not sure about her.
I just literally like looked her up and I was like, you know, when is the last like Elijah Dushku thing? Let's see. It's according to IMDb, it's like 2017. Like TV stuff. But
wow. Well, I mean, she does have a production company over.
Yeah,
so
you're right. She is okay. So she's had a couple of producer credits since then.
So she might be doing more like behind the scenes kind of stuff. She's also had a baby like last year. So you know, so she's maybe just taking some time off. But yeah, no action was taken at the time because the proper people either didn't care or weren't told. So Kramer continued to be one of the top stunt people in Hollywood all the way up to 2017. His last film credit was Blade Runner 2049, which was released about 3 months before Dushku's statement. His credit right before that was actually on Star Trek Discovery, but he has not worked since, and deservedly so. It's unfortunate that he got to work for another 2 decades after that without anyone calling him out on his shit. You know,
and she's had people, you know, for what it's worth, like back her story, like even her who was supposed to be her guardian at the time, come out and say that it was true.
They fucked up.
Yeah. And that she wasn't there for, and has said that like she even heard the story around the time and tried to say something, but people just like were writing it off, and she just kind of felt not empowered to like push it further, basically.
Right.
And so
and I read some statements from her as well, and she kind of regrets, like she felt like I was supposed to protect her and I failed, kind of thing, you know. So anyway, moving on. Once True Lies finally wrapped production in March of 1994, it was officially the second film in a row that Cameron had made that was the most expensive movie of all time, with a budget of about $120 million. It would get knocked off not long after that by Waterworld, actually.
He says, by the way, he was like in an interview around this time, he was like, it's not the most expensive movie of all time. Like Spartacus was the most expensive movie of all time, adjusted for today's dollars.
Of course, yeah. Cleopatra could be in the running, but but dollar for dollar, $120 million is the most anyone had spent, which by today's standards is about $250 million or so, which is, you know, your average Marvel movie now.
Right. Yeah. For what it's worth, I mean, you know, even when it wrapped, the thing is like a lot of stuff I read about during this time was like, it felt like filming was endless. Like, you know, you mentioned Paxton working on another movie during there, like Tia Carrere, signed on for like 7 or 8 weeks work, and she ended up cashing checks for 7 months, they said.
Yeah, I mean, it filmed overall for like a year and a half or something like that, like an absurd amount of time.
Yeah, Cameron admitted at the time to like 130 shooting days, give or take a few, but second unit, occasional, non-official first unit. The rumor got up to like 180 days.
Of actual shooting days.
Yeah, of actual shooting days. And he said Fox was sweating bullets just like Mario did. Or no, this was, I'm sorry, from an insider. It said Fox was sweating bullets just like Mario did. But what could they do? They wanted more pictures from him. And the dailies are great.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
People were always sweating bullets around these James Cameron films because they got so big, but they always end up paying off, you know?
That Richardson article I referenced at the beginning, he said that there were weeks he was watching this after just on editing. He said he was so meticulous on everything he did. And then it went for like weeks. And then there were dailies. And he said, and at the time he was writing that, Richard said, he's like, he's still shooting. He said, Schwarzenegger just came back in. He's already on another movie. And he just quietly slipped out to shoot some more with Cameron.
Yeah.
And to like get one last scene in. Yeah. Anyway, he had a quote from Tom Arnold saying, I called Cameron a perfectionist once. And he said, no, I'm a greatest.
Well, I mean, he does not he's not missing, he's not lacking in the ego department, you know. Right. So I guess the other movie that Schwarzenegger went off to do would have been Junior, right? That was his movie right after this.
Maybe, yeah.
And then he did Eraser, I think, after that.
This article, said he had slipped out and come in and shot like some extra stuff.
That's funny. It ended up opening up at #1 at the box office its opening weekend, knocking that piece of shit Forrest Gump out of the top spot.
Yeah.
And it went on to gross over $378 million worldwide, making it the third highest grossing film of 1994, which was behind Forrest Gump and The Lion King. Actually, was #1, I think. Huh. It's an impressive amount of money, but it still fell about $140 million short of T2's box office take. So it wasn't as big of a hit as Terminator 2 had been. And unlike Terminator 2, the critical reception was a little more mixed. Variety called it 141 minutes of extravagant fodder for an enticing 3-minute trailer, which is really funny to me. But then others like the New York Times and Roger Ebert gave it positive reviews. So I have a feeling, though, that there's a lot of James Cameron hate on the internet. We've talked about this in every episode, but I feel like this one gets more than any other one. We'll see what happens when we get to Avatar. I don't know. I feel like people like to hate on Avatar in retrospect, but people definitely want to hate on True Lies.
No. I mean, I think everybody feels pretty strongly about True Lies being a great film. They're also huge fans of James Cameron. There is like a small subsection of the internet that probably should use it now. And I say a small subsection. I don't know.
It's all on Reddit.
When you sort reviews by lowest first, it just feels terrible. Which is what I assume like Twitter does all the time. Like your regular feed is just like most negative first. Anyway. Let's see here. AZ283 gave it 1.5 stars, says not Arnie's best work.
I mean, that's not inaccurate.
I just love that one. It felt like an easy one to start with. How about SRPF? She says 1 star. I will never forgive James Cameron for this.
Ooh, wow. Yeah. I'm sure he's hurt.
I'm Billy.
Sure, he's begging. He's begging for your forgiveness.
I was gonna say, do you think he cries himself to sleep?
You anonymous person on the internet.
JP says 1 star. Not our JP, by the way, who's appeared on the show.
I mean, who knows though?
Yeah, who knows? My old man has this in his top 10 worst ever, and he isn't wrong. The first 90 minutes is so bad, multiplied by the ultimate Me Too. That last hour is frightening. Middle Eastern terrorism, man. You're rooting for both to die. I mean, they decided that Tom Arnold was going to be the #2 in this movie. ... Is
that a shit joke?
I think he's just saying like it's Tom Arnold. You're already making bad decisions right from the jump, I think is what he's saying.
Who does number 2 work for us? The second best Tom Arnold performance, actually.
Conan the Cribber says, humiliation and double standards. I hated this movie from start to finish. Warning, minimal plot aspects revealed. I thought the humiliation of his wife was atrocious. What a double standard. He's been lying to her for 20 years and she has coffee with another guy, so she has to sleep with a foreign agent to make up for it. Yeah, right. I thought the humiliation of the wannabe spy was also pathetic. Talk about a microcosm of absolute power corrupts absolutely. Morally empty. The action scenes were okay until the crappy helicopter scene. So he's trying to save his family, right? That's why he unleashes 5 million rounds into the fucking tower so that it'll collapse on his family. Crap film through and through. Let's see here. Let's keep going. Kyle says, 1 star. There's no amount of Arnold riding a horse that can make me play with watching this again. I understand it's different times, but the 45-minute segment of the movie dedicated to the humiliation of Jamie Lee Curtis is one of the toughest watches I've ever witnessed. For a lack of a better analysis, it's gross. It seriously made me contemplate turning off the movie. He's serious. I gotta get. Let's go to this one. 1.5 stars from Leo, who says, my favorite part was Artie laughing while playing Thumb Wars.
He does make a crazy face.
Yeah, he does.
It's very similar to his like Total Recall face.
Thumbs.
My other favorite part is when he's like, the bridge is out, and the face that he makes during that. Oh man, classic Arnie.
I skipped any reviews that had clever titles, by the way, like True Idiocy, True Garbage, True Shit, True, all those. Here's Pizzoa, who says, this is the worst film I've ever seen. Never have I seen anything as dumb as this. I usually let me preface this by saying I'm only reading this because I hated it so much. It just
good.
I follow a subreddit that's called I Am Very Smart. And it's just anytime somebody's just being a pretentious fuck. And anyway, never have I seen something as dumb as this. I usually like Schwarzenegger's films, and I accept the low level of reality in them as a rule that applies throughout his opus. I am known to like several films that are even less realistic, and in which the only link with the real world is the occasional use of gravity, like Lai Wong in 1991. True Lies in 94 is out of Schwarzenegger style, and he badly lacks acting skills to break out of that style, so that the whole feeling of this movie is like watching John Cleese in a film that is not funny, or like Leslie Nielsen in his black and white Canadian Mountie roles, as opposed to his later works with Mel Brooks. There is no need to go into details that make this film stupid, like lack of any aviation knowledge on the behalf of the writer and director, particularly absolutely no idea of how the RR Pegasus engine works. If I was to list all of the bad stuff in this movie, I would end up retyping its script. My advice for all Schwarzenegger fans is to see it, because if you like him that much, you will have no trouble to forgive him this blunder. And also, knowing how bad this is, you will appreciate his other films more. To all others, I suggest that you check your IQ. And if it has value below 0, then you should see it. If your IQ is higher than 0, you should not. Beware. Spoiler ahead. However, some satisfaction could be found in one scene where Jamie Lee Curtis is in her underwear, and the fact that she wears short skirts and dresses throughout the whole movie, and she does have a pair of fine legs.
I have never wanted to give somebody a wedgie so bad in my life. Wow. What a son of a bitch. Like, what? Wow. What a pompous bastard who thinks that they're smarter than everyone else.
Yeah,
it makes me angry.
That review so much.
His entire opus. You didn't even use the word opus. He's not even using these words correctly.
Oh, you'll love this review from Faisal. I love this. It was literally half star review. Outstanding performance is the subtitle of this review. This is really amazing movie of all time. Arnold didn't receive the Oscar for this. That I really didn't like. I don't know how Oscars are selected. The movie for Oscar was selected once, called Chicago. I think this movie is the worst of all. If they keep on selecting this kind of movies, then they have to close the Oscars in the future. True Lies should have got Oscar for Best Picture. It shows how Arnold saves her wife and daughter from the terrorists. Instead, he traps himself in the game. The performance is fantastic. Its special effects are awful. I have watched 4 times in the cinema. James Cameron is really hardcore director who didn't receive Oscar for this movie.
Wow, there are so many things wrong with that review, and including giving it a half star when you clearly liked it. That felt like one of those like we had an AI read a bunch of Letterboxd reviews and then write its own review of Lies.
It did. Maybe you're right. Holy shit, I didn't think about that, but that could have 100% been it. How about Tom here? He says half star. Now, I'm fully aware of my bullying hate of everything, James Cameron, but going into a rewatch of True Lies, I actually thought it would be silly fun, if nothing else. Turns out I was wrong. Oh, God, I was so wrong. Each and every scene in this atrocity belongs on the cutting room floor. How any editor worth their salt would think any of this should be made public is beyond me. I swear to God, it really is. It read like a fever dream of a deranged mind of Jimmy. And that's fine if he would just let it stay in bed with him. Fuck you. Fuck all your avatars. I hope they never see the light of day.
First of all, you can't leave every bit of footage on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
You don't have a movie.
That's true. That's it.
Fuck you and fuck all your avatars. That's going to be my new go-to insult for anyone.
I like that.
Fuck all your avatars.
This is a half star from Nut.
The next
It
Cinema
says,
Shop
a nasty
t-shirt.
movie.
Yes.
A nasty movie that gaslights its audience into a selfish and cruel power fantasy sold as a wacky action comedy. All the mugging for the camera and zingers are wildly out of place, and none of the jokes land, except as bizarre artifacts of the 90s movie trends. Double takes falling down, bug eyes, a bellhop diving out of the way of a horse. This movie never earns its camp because it isn't harmless and silly. It is actively mean.
I mean, if I were the bellhop, I would jump out of the way of a horse, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
can't blame him.
I don't know. The horse scene was fun.
Yeah, but he's
I gotta
run
say,
over you.
I do still get a giggle when he's talking to the horse after the whole thing.
What kind of police are you?
Yeah.
What kind of cop
What
are you?
kind of cop are you anyway?
1 star for Miranda, the spiritual prequel to Avatar. American imperialism is nothing but a tool for progression of a romantic plot. The characters are vacuous, but Arnie is Arnie. A lot of wildly unpredictable incompetence mapped onto the Arabic language. All they do is yell, Yalla, and look frantic. Their unpredictability translated as threatening. Jamie Lee Curtis was also done dirty. Overall, a pretty sickening film.
Ugh, sickening.
All right, just a couple more. Annabelle says, utterly psychotic. The movie should be banned, put into the Museum of Tolerance. Straight men actually wish they could catch their wives cheating because they want most of all to because what they want most of all is a preface to guilt and torture her into total submission. This movie says wives are the real terrorists.
No, it doesn't.
Seth says 1 star. Wow, this does not hold up. It manages to hate, exploit, blatantly fear women all at once. Jamie Lee effing Curtis is giving nothing to do besides dance in her underwear and drop guns and wave her arms daintily. We might get moments of observing her emote, but never does it even attempt to acknowledge those emotions. And the whole ordeal is even sadder and grosser in light of what we know about stunt coordinator Joel Kramer's conduct with 12-year-old Elisha Dushku. I expected this not to hold up and was still somehow surprised by the heaping pile of toxic alpha male filmmaker that this is. Super gross.
I mean, here's the thing. Saying that Jamie Lee Curtis has nothing to do, you clearly weren't paying attention because she is incredible in this. And the scene prior to the striptease scene where she's being interrogated, regardless of what you think about, again, how she got to that point, her performance during that interrogation scene is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
She goes from being scared to being like when they ask her about Harry, she gets really like almost like emotional, and she kind of softens, and then she gets mad saying, I just want to go home to my family. She goes through so many emotions during that scene, and she plays it so well. That scene is incredible. I think it's one of the best scenes she's ever done. Like she is so good in that. So saying that she didn't get to show any emotion during this, like, fuck off. You didn't pay attention to the movie.
Yeah. The only other review I had was from Pig Ray. She says 1 star. God, men are terrifying.
I mean,
that's what she said.
That's true. Unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, allow us 3 white bearded men to tell you all how you're
otherwise.
so wrong.
I mean, there was some controversy surrounding the film when it came out. A lot of critics, like a lot of these reviews you read, called it sexist or misogynistic for its treatment of its female characters, especially Jamie Lee Curtis. While a lot of others criticized its depiction of stereotypical Middle Eastern villains, saying that the film conveyed strong anti-Arab or anti-Muslim prejudice. And in fact, the National Council on Islamic Affairs actually boycotted the film and picketed theaters that were showing it. So there was controversy even back then around it. And that's not necessarily like unfounded, I don't think. I think any discussion of this film, you have to kind of address that stuff. Like, is the movie misogynistic? Well, its treatment of Helen in the middle section of the film is very weird. Schwarzenegger's character uses all of the might of the U.S. government at his disposal to just kind of fuck with his wife's head, which is kind of fucked up, you know? She's kidnapped at gunpoint, then she's gaslit into thinking that she's a double agent working for the government, and then she is essentially pimped out by her own husband in an attempt to add some spice to his marriage. Like, that's, if you think about it, it is kind of fucked up. I can see how people find that offensive, and I genuinely can't find a way to defend that, really, because I think it is really weird, especially watching it in 2022 eyes. Like, it does come across as a very bizarre, like, not just misogynistic, but just like weird, just like, this is weird, you know?
It is weird, but I will say this about it. I mean, my only defense of it would be is that the movie tells a story that he does pull some shit with her, but she's very good in it. He doesn't put her in a predicament that he thinks he's not going to get her out of. So he is very macho alpha male, right?
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
he is that guy, but he's also an idiot. I mean, it definitely tries to show you that he's sort of a dummy about the way he's acting about it. And that
he's really good as a spy, and he's really bad at being just a regular dude and being a husband and a father. Like,
right,
he's really
right.
stupid when it comes to
he's
that
being a dumbass. I feel like the movie does know that. Like, he's doing this stuff, and it's funny to him, or it's fun because he's teaching her a lesson. But I don't think that he's actually ever putting her in a situation that he doesn't think he's in control of.
Sure.
For whatever that's worth. I get that part.
But it's still psychological torment for her, because she doesn't know.
Sure. I mean, the only other credit I could get. Yeah. So okay, you're right. I can't defend everything about it. It's not the way that anyone should behave.
Well, here's the thing. If I did that to my wife, we would have a divorce. Immediately afterward.
Yeah.
Right. You know, right. Like, if you do that, if you did any sane wife, like, her husband puts them through that, and I'm sorry, that marriage you didn't just add some spice to that marriage, you just ended the fucking marriage. Like, that is
for what it's worth. By the end of it, she's
no
just,
court's going to side with.
She's
them
also a secret agent too. Like, she's like, I'm a badass too. So
yeah.
Go fuck
I mean, the thing is that section of the film is incredibly entertaining, though. You know, like, as weird as it is, it's very entertaining, largely due to Bill Paxton's performance, who is amazing through the whole thing.
I would say that if you ever found your significant other potentially cheating on somebody else, if there wasn't a part of you that would potentially want to torture them a little bit, you know,
he just has the
cathartic element of it. He has the ability to do it, so he does it. And the
whole
not
time
saying it's justified. I'm saying that it's a joke. It's trying to be a joke.
Yeah,
it's not. It's not.
Well, I'm just saying, I absolutely understand where people are coming from when they criticize that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know, they're not wrong.
But I think a lot of people also think that, like, the scene with Jamie Lee Curtis doing the striptease and stuff like that are an issue. That was her fucking idea. I mean, I know the striptease was in there, I don't think Jamie Lee Curtis has no problem with this movie. Jamie Lee Curtis, I don't think feels like she was forced into anything she didn't want to do. She was having a good time. I mean, as far as anything we know,
I mean, she talks about it fondly, you know, and we know Jamie Lee Curtis's persona. She is a very liberally minded woman, and she doesn't have a problem with it. Now, granted, her perspective could be different because she's involved with it and she's proud of her work, and she deserves to be proud of her work in it. She is incredibly good. Like I said, I think this is some of the best work of her career. And I mean, she has this ability to go from dorky and frumpy to sexy at the drop of a hat, and it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And her comic delivery is incredible.
Oh yeah.
Like she's very, very good in it. There's a lot of good stuff. It's just, you know, that whole section of the film, I was watching it and I was like, this is a wild misappropriation of government funds. Like, these are my fucking tax dollars are paying for Arnold to fuck with his wife like this, you know. It's ridiculous.
Arnold,
but again,
Arnold
it's
is a
big,
goof.
dumb movie.
Yeah, he's being insecure. I don't know. I don't think that the movie is not unaware of the fact that he's being a goof.
Sure.
Like he's being stupid for the things he's doing.
I think part of the weird thing, though, is that I don't think that Cameron does comedy very well. A lot of the scenes in this that are funny or supposed to be funny come across a little bit weird. Like they don't come across like he does not have he's shooting comedic scenes through the lens of an action movie guy, you know, which is very different, and it's edited like an action movie guy. So like certain moments, like when the terrorist sees the Harrier jet coming up and he does a little bug-eyed double take, like it feels out of place a little bit. And I think that's part of why people see this movie and they have a hard time seeing it as goofy, because it's not played goofy. Like it might be written that way, but it's not edited and shot that way. It's edited and shot like a straightforward action movie. Which is it's a very different skill set that Cameron, as good as he is, he's not a comedy guy. And you know, and it's proven by how insecure he was about the writing of the script, you know.
It reminds me of like when you see a new comedian show up for that first batch of open mics, they're saying things that they phrased in a stand-up type way, but it's just for the veterans who have been there for a year, 2 years, 5 years or more, it's just nails on a chalkboard.
Well, it's the delivery's off.
Yeah, it's the delivery.
Something could look great on paper, but the delivery is off. And I think a lot of the comedy in this comes across that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Except when someone like Jamie Lee Curtis does something that can only be done through performance, like when she falls during the striptease, you know, things like that. You know, that stuff comes across because it's all performance based, you know.
Right.
Well, and then there's also the fact that section of the movie goes on for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Like literally, I timed it today when I watched it because I was curious. I timed it from the moment that that she gets brought in to the moment that the terrorists burst into that room, and it's 45 minutes, a solid 45 minutes of movie. That goes on really long, especially because there's a guy, Harry Trasker, whose job it is to save the world on a regular basis. He's using all of these resources for a gag when there's still a terrorist out there with a nuclear weapon that he apparently just forgot about for a while because he thought his wife was cheating on him. So even from a story standpoint, I'd say that's a flaw. You know?
It's tough to work through because
I feel like there could have been some editing where they're jumping back and forth, at least reminding us that the terrorist is still out there.
And I'm working through it right now as we're talking about it. Like I'm like, well, I don't think Jamie Lee Curtis ends up being helpless. She ends up being a secret agent at the end of it. But at the same time, I get it. It does spend a lot of time like playing with her. She's also falling for stupid ass Bill Paxton. The vet gets him wet. You know,
the vet gets them wet,
and so
got an ass like a 10-year-old boy.
That's just science.
So you know, it's tough because I mean, even with the it was like the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. They had a protest in Washington about the movie and stuff. And you want to, I don't know. There's a part of me, and again, I try to understand that I'm like a white dude, and so what do I know? But they had a problem with portraying Middle Easterners as homicidal religious zealots and like all of this stuff. And they wanted to boycott it. But according to James Cameron, he responded to some of this that he had originally intended Irish terrorists. That was like his thing. But then the movie Blown Away, he had heard about Blown Away, and they were going to have
Tommy Lee Jones, right?
Yeah, they were going to have Irish terrorists. So he switched it. And they ultimately, I think, included like something at the end of the credit saying something about this, that this is not intended to be representative of
sure. I mean, yeah, but that's a little
blah, blah, blah.
like, I don't know, too little, too late kind of thing.
It's tough. I mean, my problem is like one of the things I think that the left side of the aisle sometimes has is that they can't take a fucking joke sometimes. And then at the same time, I understand on the other side of things, they're like,
you have to sympathize with, like, if you're a person of Middle Eastern origin, you know, your family's Muslim or your family's Arab, or like the actor who played I don't think they ever say what country they're from, like purposely, but the actor who played the lead terrorist is Pakistani. But really, and so many white people see anyone who's brown as being the same, like, which is fucked up, but it's the truth that a lot of people see them that way.
Well, if you're looking for like a fight, you could even also say, well, one of the main good guys is also Pakistani.
Yeah,
was he Pakistani because the other guys were, or was, you know? Like,
I think Cameron definitely put Grant Heslov in there as kind of a like, oh yeah, but we're gonna have a good guy who's brown as well, and he sacrifices himself, you know, and that's also maybe a little too late. I don't know. If you're someone who if you're and even like it's worse now post 9/11, but even then, like, you know, if you have to realize we're like you said, we're three white guys talking about this, but if you're Middle Eastern or you're you look like these terrorists, then you can understand why you would have problems with, like, oh man, like everyone is that Hollywood is just portraying all brown people as terrorists, which does happen, you know, and it's not exclusive to this film. Fuck, it happened in Iron Man, you know, 25 years later. Right. But that doesn't make it right just because it keeps happening, and it's happening less and less, thankfully, but it has been happening for decades. The same thing happened with Russians, you know, which it's a little bit different because Russians are white people. So there's not like a racial thing that's involved as you know, there's been so much racial discrimination against Middle Eastern people, especially since 9/11, but due to, in a large part, because of how people who are inclined to be racist anyway, usually, honestly, are see any brown person as, or any Muslim person as like a terrorist or a villain, and they're simply not. Right. And we're seeing more things now. Like I think something like the recent Ms. Marvel is a really great step in the right direction, but I'm not going to tell anyone that they should not be offended by that. You know, that they should not be offended by the way that the terrorists are portrayed in this.
I watched the movie.
I don't come from that.
Well, tune in for the bonus episode, because we had to do a bonus episode. I had some thoughts about Miss Marvel and and Everything Everywhere All at Once and stuff like that. These not like in a bad way. It feels like I'm going to be like, fuck foreigners. That's not what I mean.
Let's go ahead and clip that out. And now a special message from Gary.
I just felt like that was building up to that. You know, no. What irritates me more and more is that just people are shitheads. That's the problem. That's the problem with everything, because you know, like on one hand, I want to like defend like this movie and say like they weren't even thinking about all that shit. But then on the other hand, I'm like, that's the fucking problem.
Yeah, maybe they should have been. Maybe they should have thought about that.
Yeah.
Just do a Die Hard and make a group of terrorists who are all different nationalities.
Right.
You know,
right.
Offend everyone. You offend no one.
Yeah, just fucking offend them all. You know? Go with the Irish terrorists, do some potatoes in there. And like,
one of them's dressed like a leprechaun. Yeah.
Right.
I think when Cameron's
and they're led by John O'Connor. That's how we bring it all back, gentlemen.
I love a callback, Todd. I love a callback. When James Cameron's career is discussed, I feel like this movie is one that gets left out of the conversation a lot. Like when people talk about James Cameron, they tend to talk about his sci-fi stuff and obviously Titanic. But I think its treatment of women and Muslim and Arabs might have a lot to do with that, because unlike a lot of other James Cameron movies, this one actually feels more dated. Partially, I think that's because it's the only film of his that he's made that's set in present day. But it's also, I think, because a lot of its social attitudes do feel outdated, so people don't discuss it as much, or they overlook it, or don't feel like it's worthy of discussion. And I mean, listen, I know we talk about a lot of horror movies, and I watch a lot of like exploitation movies and things like that at home. And this is something that comes up a lot. It doesn't mean you have to write the movie off. It just means that you have to consider it in the context in which it was made. You can acknowledge its issues. That doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. You know what I mean? That's how I feel about it. I can watch a movie where I'm like, oh yeah, that's, unless the whole movie has a very problematic attitude, which does also happen. But sometimes you just have to like go like, man, that's fucked up that they didn't think that was a problem. But I mean,
oh dude,
I'm not going to not watch
a movie that drops the F word that's not fuck. I'm like, oh, you can't say that.
Yeah. Yeah,
like
but
it just,
and it doesn't make it right, but it's like, I'm not going to write the whole movie off because of that, you know?
Right.
And now watching this, like, and I loved this movie as a kid. I'm sure the Jamie Lee Curtis striptease scene had nothing to do with that. When I was 12 years old when this came out, I'm sure it had nothing to do with it at all. I mean, it's totally coincidental, but I really love.
I don't care until the day I die. I don't care how evolved our society gets. I will always love titties.
Yeah. But
you can clip that out, Todd.
Now, another message from Gary Horn.
But I do, watching this now, I have to admit that this might be Cameron's worst movie. Not counting Piranha 2. Piranha 2 doesn't count. He didn't direct that movie. Right. I'll wait until I've rewatched Titanic and Avatar to make an official ranking on this. But this is definitely the worst that we've talked about so far. But you know what? Every director has a worst movie. That doesn't mean it's a bad movie. True Lies might be Cameron's worst, but it's by no means a bad movie. It is a very good movie, I think, featuring some of the best action movies of its time. I mean, you know, people talk like when a director's really good. Quentin Tarantino's one I always come back to. Everyone's like, his worst movie is Death Proof. Like, yeah, probably, but Death Proof fucking slaps. Like, Death Proof is awesome.
Yeah.
And it might be his worst movie, but it's still a fucking great movie. So, like, some directors are so good that even their worst movie is a really good movie. And I think that's kind of the case with James Cameron. But this one's a little messier than his other movies, I think. It's in true James Cameron fashion, it's a little too long. And I think that while some of his movies justify their length a little bit more, I think the story that he's telling here doesn't require 2.5 hours to tell it. And the fact that it fully abandons its main terrorist plot for a good 45 minutes in the middle, it probably has a lot to do with that. But then also, like, I don't know that I ever noticed it before watching it. I watched it twice in the last week or two. I don't know if I ever noticed this before, but watching it this time, I'm like, man, Cameron really makes no real attempt to hide the fact that he's using stunt doubles in a lot of these scenes. Like, it starts in the very first scene when Arnold is running down that hill in the snow in that opening scene. Like, it's very, and there's like an explosion behind him. Like, it's very clearly not Arnold, but like, he's literally running at the camera. You see this guy's full face. You see the stunt double's full face. I assume that's Joel Kramer. And then even worse is in the horseback riding scene. Like, it's clearly not Arnold in most of those shots. And the one where the horse like jumps in the fountain when they're in the hotel. Yeah. Cameron goes into slow-mo and you can clearly look at this guy's face and like, that's not fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's way too like thin. He's definitely not Arnold. But it's like, why are we not at least trying to cut around the fact that we know it's not Arnold. I mean, obviously, but when you watch a movie, it's like a suspension of disbelief kind of thing. And it's
so you'll hang a Harrier jet 30 stories off the ground.
Yeah.
But you're not going to maybe do the guy's face a little differently, maybe throw a little CG mask on him.
When I was reading the stuff about when I was reading the stuff about James Cameron, like going ape shit and freaking out his first wife on how much he was into movies, he was like very much like, I don't know who Humphrey Bogart is. I'm just interested in like what the fuck is going on in these scenes, like the craziness that's happening and how they did this. So I can buy that James Cameron at the end of the day is probably like, I don't, whatever. It's not him.
I don't know. I have a hard time.
I'm trying to tell you, look at this shit. Look at this.
But to me, like, he's such a perfectionist that it's really surprising to me that he would allow that I mean, and I even said on our Terminator 2 episode that, like, sometimes I like when the seams show in a movie, like where you can see how they did it, like in the scenes in Terminator 2 where you can see the back projection in the car. I don't mind that. That's fine. But I have my fucking limits. Like, and when I'm watching an action scene that's supposed to be Arnold, and it's a great action scene and it's clearly not Arnold, and you can only tell that because of the angles that you're shooting it at, like shoot it at a different angle where you can't tell it's Arnold. Or it's really weird that he would allow that because he is such a perfectionist. Yeah. It's I don't know. It's really off-putting to me because I intellectually know it's a stunt man. This isn't fucking Tom Cruise,
of course.
But I don't know, the fact that they don't even try to hide it bugs me for some reason.
Yeah, maybe they were a little more concerned with whether or not they could than to determine whether or not they should.
Thank you, Gary. So story-wise, you kind of see where Cameron's coming from on this movie. I'll return a little bit to a quote that I read from Cameron early in this episode, where he said, "I saw the film as an anti-James Bond, a reality check on the uber male fantasy. I think what Cameron's attempting to do here is to kind of deconstruct the type of action movie tough guy that was prevalent throughout the 80s and the early 90s, characters that were often played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I think it does mostly work in that regard, even though I think that there are other movies that do it a little bit better, which brings me to my pick for further viewing, which is Last Action Hero."
I knew you were going to say that. Somehow I knew you were going to say that.
Last Action Hero. First of all, I love it. I absolutely love that movie. We mentioned it earlier, but it had been Schwarzenegger's most recent film at the time of True Lies' release, and it was a big flop. But I adore that movie, and I think it's actually funnier and a better deconstruction of the stereotypical action films than True Lies is, because I think it plays the comedy a lot better than True Lies does. I think the action's probably better in True Lies. I mean, it's big, but they're going for something very different in Last Action Hero. But I think the two complement each other very well because of that. Like especially if you've been having like a movie, like an Arnold marathon, you've watched like Commando and Raw Deal and all this stuff, and then you throw on these two movies, it's kind of a coda on those where like you're like, or this is kind of pulling the rug out from under that whole persona. I think that's really fun. But I do have one other one that I'll let you guys. Actually, I'm gonna let you guys go first, and then I'll go with my next pick.
I don't know. Like I thought. I mean, it depends on the way you want to look at this, right? Like it's like, do you want to go harder into exactly what this movie is, like as far as like crazy action and fun, 90s action? I mean, my favorite 90s action stuff's like The Rock.
And,
Con Air.
Mm-hmm. Like that stuff.
Michael Bay.
You want to go more machismo, fucking Demolition Man or something like that. Those movies, those are fun. I don't know.
I honestly think Demolition Man does a little bit of that deconstruction thing too.
I think it does too,
because like Sly's character in that is this big macho guy, and he gets put to this future where he is very out of place. Because that kind of cop isn't needed anymore. So it's kind of doing the same thing, in its own way.
I'm going to tell you a weird one that deconstructs. Like, if you want to talk about deconstruction, and one of the things that I literally am not even making this up. I just watched both of these movies recently. And one of them because the director's my favorite director of all time, and that's Big Trouble in Little China, because that completely tears apart Kurt Russell as like the action star.
He's
like
such a goober.
He is kind of useless. But I love that movie for that reason. And then also, like, I think you could take like a movie. This is gonna when we look back on like Kurt, who gave us that awesome list for Letterboxd, and we found out that Todd's recommended movie with Texas Chainsaw was like Speed.
Yeah. I still gotta go back and re-listen to that. Weird Science.
Weird Science. Like, I just watched that movie, and I don't know that I've ever sat down and like really paid attention to that movie, but I feel like Weird Science totally deconstructs, like, for the 80s. Like, it totally like tears apart
the like teen comedy kind of
the
thing?
teen comedy.
Okay.
And like the
I haven't seen it in many
like,
years.
I'm just into hot chicks and big boobies and like all that stuff. Like, that movie plays with that a little bit. And I don't know. It's interesting. But
interesting.
Nice.
All right.
So for mine, I kind of wanted to pair it with another James Bond, but is like, but he does this, or he goes to this.
He's got
place.
a great butt.
He does have a great butt. Yeah.
Any of them, any of the Bonds,
they all do squat. They all do squats,
but
especially Daniel Craig. Come on,
yeah,
sure.
But with True Lies being James Bond, but he goes home to his wife. I was looking
Spy Hard.
No, this was James Bond, but he goes to his 10-year high school reunion.
Okay,
1997.
All right, don't know.
Gross Point Blank.
Oh yeah, great movie.
Okay. I think
he's a hitman. He's not a spy. He's a
hitman. But kind of that whole vibe of he's at this point where he's starting to examine his life and all of these things, and one of his colleagues wants to go to breakfast with friends and talk, and he's hey, thanks very much for the pen. I just used it to kill somebody.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
He
I'm
shows
picking up what
these,
you're putting down.
Yeah, he shows up to these awkward things like, oh, I should have brought my gun.
Yeah. It's a great movie too, honestly.
Yeah, it's got a great cast. I think they nail the comedy aspect. I think they are kind of very complimentary, these two, because I think Gross Point Blank is a little more heavy on the comedy. You can look at the cast and they're all fairly well versed in comedy, and it still has good action, but the action is a couple notches down.
Sure.
So I think that would make a really nice double feature.
I like
that. I was sitting here like as you were talking, and I was thinking about other movies that are similar. That like
I had another one, and I can't remember it now.
Well, I was just thinking about how like like Hot Fuzz or something. Like there's clearly the guy who like loves action movies and is like super into it, and and it's just it plays with those tropes. It is interesting that Cameron seems to be able to do both at the same time.
Yeah,
so
simultaneously.
I'll give him props for that. Like
he personifies those tropes while kind of deconstructing them at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. So it's I'll give him that one. Like he tears it apart. I feel like there was something else I was thinking of, and I can't remember. Earlier while you were talking, I was also thinking, I was like, what's funny is like Indiana Jones is almost like that in a way. Like he's very much, I know we're going way off base probably by me saying that, but it's just that he's like very macho, and even dudes like bros consider him a very macho like guy, but he's also very goofy.
He's also goofy. Yeah.
Yeah. He like falls apart at times and like doesn't, and he's also really cares about the woman, like
snakes. Just why did it have to be snakes?
I don't know. Anyway,
it's a very human
these
thing.
Things toyed with, like the ultimate alpha male stuff, put against like just being a human being.
Yeah, I like that. So I'm going to go to a weird direction on this. So there were talks of a True Lies sequel for quite a long time. Immediately after the movie came out, there were talks, but then Cameron got busy making Titanic, which was quite a story, which we'll get into on our next episode. But so that kind of fell to the wayside for a bit. And then after 9/11, he kind of lost interest in doing that because he's like, he felt it was really difficult to portray terrorists in any kind of light that was considered like light or funny, right?
Yeah,
which is understandable. So the closest thing that we've ever gotten to a True Lies sequel is a movie that you may not have heard of. It was written by Tom Arnold himself.
What?
Directed by Penelope Spheris, the director of Wayne's World, the first one.
Okay.
As well as like Suburbia, The Decline of Western Civilization, one of my favorite documentaries of all time. It's a movie called The Kid and I. So in this movie, and I'm going to give you a little plot synopsis because I'm sure you haven't seen it or heard of it.
No.
Tom Arnold plays sort of a version of himself. He's an actor who has had he's had like kind of his career is on a down slump. It starts off with him like wanting to commit suicide, and then he gets approached by an agent played by Henry Winkler that shows up and offers him like a business deal where there's like this billionaire played by Joe Mantegna. How do you say his name? I don't know. You know who I'm talking about.
Mantegna.
Is that how you say his name?
I think it is something weird like that. Yeah.
So he plays the billionaire, and he wants to hire Tom Arnold's character to write and co-star in a movie that is basically a sequel to True Lies, because his son's favorite movie is True Lies. So in this movie, Tom Arnold's character, even though he's not called Tom Arnold, his name's like Bill. His name's Bill Williams, so his name is actually William Williams. But he starred in True Lies. Right, his character starred in True Lies in this movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this billionaire's son's favorite movie is True Lies. He wants a sequel, and his son wants to be in it. He wants to be in this movie. He wants to be an action star. So Tom Arnold decides, he needs the money, so he takes the job. And here's the thing. This movie co-stars. First,
I'm looking at this right now.
Shannon Elizabeth is in it. They play. Who does Shannon Elizabeth play? The wife of the billionaire. Linda Hamilton plays the film producer, who is Tom Arnold's ex-wife in the movie. And then they make Linda Hamilton, so another Terminator connection, another James Cameron connection, and then they end up making the movie, which they call, here's the sequel to True Lies is named Two Spies. True Lies, Two Spies.
Nice.
The name of the movie. So that's it. That's my other pick for. Oh, and here
I was about to say
Arnold Schwarzenegger is in the movie. Jamie Lee Curtis is in the movie, like as their character, as themselves.
I was going to say, are you going to skip Shaq?
Shaquille O'Neal is in it, and Bill fucking Goldberg is in it.
Like, what is happening with this movie? What is this?
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway. Yeah, there you go. There, so it was just like, and this was while Arnold was governor. I think this is 2005, so he would have still been governor. Which him becoming governor was another reason why they never moved forward on a True Lies sequel, because he became governor in 2003. So but if you want to listen, it's hard to say I'm recommending The Kid and I, because I'm not saying that it's a good movie to watch, but I am saying that it is a companion piece to True Lies.
Yeah. I was gonna say, do I smell another Cinema Shock double feature night at Radio Room?
True Lies and then The Kid and I.
I think that would be great.
Everyone would be like, the what? The kid? The what?
Yeah. What is this?
Yeah. So anyway, that's my other out of left field double feature. I just came across that movie in my research, and I was like, oh my God. Like, what is this? So anyway, that's our further viewing for this
we
one.
didn't mention Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I don't know how that didn't come up.
I know. I feel like Mr. and Mrs. Smith was very inspired by this, you could say. It's that's where Jamie Lee Curtis and Arnold at the end of this movie is the beginning of Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Right.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, that'd be
right.
good.
You're absolutely right. Well, True Lies, as we mentioned, was a big success, but it wasn't the kind of like game changer that Terminator 2 had been. Despite its enormous budget, breathtaking stunts, it was not breaking any it wasn't really breaking any new ground like The Abyss and Terminator 2 had been. It had allowed James Cameron to play outside of the sci-fi genre, and it had helped to solidify his relationship with Fox after making this huge production deal. But really the biggest achievement on this was probably getting his special effects company off the ground, Digital Domain. For their very first film, Digital Domain earned an Oscar nomination for its visual effects on True Lies. They were nominated for Best Visual Effects. It lost to ILM for their work on Forrest fucking Gump. So
piece of garbage that nobody's ever seen.
Piece of shit, Forrest Gump. But you think I'm joking? You think I'm?
Are you serious? You don't like Forrest Gump?
No, fuck Forrest Gump. Anyway, We'll do Forrest Gump. We'll do a Robert Zemeckis series down the line. You can hear all my thoughts on Forrest Gump. I loved it in the 90s, but I don't love it anymore. Anyway, it was time for James Cameron to move on to the next film. And we all know what that next film was, right?
Yep.
Spider-Man.
Yes.
So for a little while, that did seem to be what Cameron's next move was going to be. We mentioned earlier he'd been working on a script for this before even working on True Lies. I think we even mentioned in our first episode of this season or this series that he had grown up. He loved comic books, and he especially loved Spider-Man comics. And he had actually convinced Carol Co., who produced Terminator 2, to purchase the rights to Spider-Man, which they did way back in 1990. So a few years before this. That's why he was working on that treatment. He had written a script for Spider-Man. And everyone in Hollywood loved it. Stan Lee read it. Stan Lee loved it. Everyone loved this script. And he went with an origin story, and it was pretty accurate to the comic book. It was pretty accurate. It was, Peter Parker is a dorky kid who's got a mind for science, something that James Cameron could very much relate with. And it was, set in with Spider-Man as a high school kid, right? Mm-hmm. But he did make a few thoughtful changes, including giving Peter Parker biological web shooters, which was an idea that Sam Raimi, of course, would later use in his Spider-Man film in 2001. Now, James Cameron has gone on record about this because he didn't receive any credit on Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi movie. But his response was basically, when someone asked him, how you feel about them not giving you credit, he says, well, that wasn't very nice of them, was it? He honestly didn't care because he didn't need the money that would come from any, residuals he would get off that. Yeah. At this point, he didn't need it. So he didn't really care. He didn't care enough to fight it in court, basically. Right. So it would have been fascinating, I think, to see Cameron's take on Spider-Man, but it wasn't meant to be, though. Carol Co. filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 1995. And during the bankruptcy filing, it became clear that they didn't have the rights to Spider-Man in quite as concrete a way as they might have thought. According to Cameron, is a quote, "Here I am working on Spider-Man, and it turns out there's a lien against the rights, and Sony's got a piece of it, and Carol Co. doesn't really own it, even though they think they own it." So, and this is a very complicated history, which we're obviously not going to get into today, but it dates back to the mid 80s when Marvel's selling rights to their characters left and right for movies. And it gets very complicated, and it's still very complicated in terms of Spider-Man because Sony still owns part of the rights but Marvel's producing the movies, and it's a whole big clusterfuck.
And Leonardo DiCaprio should be thankful because he would have literally had these new web shooters installed into his fucking wrists.
Yeah.
Thanks to James Cameron. He's like, we need him to literally shoot webs out of his hands. And they're like, we can't do that. And he's like, I don't want to hear can't.
I don't believe in the word can't. He's
going
to actually
shoot webs.
Actually, scratch that. He's going to shoot the web right out of his ass, just like a real spider. Cameron actually tried to get Fox to go because he had this deal with Fox. He tried to get them to go after Spider-Man to try to get the rights, but they actually weren't willing to get into the nasty legal fight and potential bidding war with other studios and producers. There are all these overlapping claims on the character, again dating back to all that mess in the 80s. But in the end, it didn't really matter. James Cameron moved on. He's like, fuck it, let's go on to something
wait
else.
A second, but you are saying there is potential that Marvel could convince James Cameron to do the Kang Dynasty.
Probably not anymore.
They can convince him
not anymore.
Pick
Maybe
up an MCU film.
I don't see that happening ever. He is way too James Cameron to ever want to do what Kevin Feige tells him to do.
But if we give Cameron one Marvel movie, that will let everything freeze for a while, and a lot of people will come back from this Marvel fatigue that they've got. And then once his come out,
because his movie's going to take 4 years to make.
Yeah, because it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
Once it comes out, then we can jump back into the Marvel stuff.
Well, he was finally ready to move on to his next movie, and this is a story. His next movie would take him even further from, this was this one's present day, True Lies. But his next movie is going to take him even further from those futuristic trappings of his early films. One that would actually take him 85 years in the past to the real world sinking of the Titanic. And it's a huge story. I hope we can fit it all into one episode, because
I'd love for somebody to cover Titanic someday and to talk about everything. That
we're talking about it, Gary. You're going to talk about it. Gary's never seen it. We're not going to get into that conversation. We're leaving for our next bonus episode about how Gary feels going into his first viewing of Titanic. But we are going to do that on our very next episode of Cinema Shock. We're going to discuss James Cameron filming the most expensive movie ever made, again, for the third film in a row. So that's where we're at. Of course, you can watch Titanic along with us. Luckily, it's a little bit easier to find than True Lies was. Titanic I think it's on like HBO Max or something right now. It's like really easy to find.
Yeah.
So luckily, we're not running into that problem for the next couple of episodes on this series. So watch Titanic along with us. I personally have not seen it in many, many years, so I'm very excited. I've already started my research for that episode. I'm reading. I mentioned to you guys. Gary has the same book, but a 200-page book just about the making of the Titanic. So we have plenty of information, and it's going to be fun because it is a fascinating story. So
I'm looking forward to it too. It's been years.
Yeah, many years.
I can't tell you how long it's been, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. Well, guys,
James Cameron's Titanic, or how Gary learned to hate Leonardo DiCaprio.
There's nothing wrong with Leo. Nothing wrong with Leo. Anyway, that's it for this episode, guys.
Yay.
Thanks for joining. Where can you fellas be found on the internet for our listeners to follow you?
I don't know. I am at This Is Gary Horde on all of the social medias.
And if you liked any of the Star Trek stuff we talked about, please consider coming over and checking out my show, Computer Resume Podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. And you can support us on Patreon, and you can find us on YouTube, and you can find us on all of the socials at Computer Resume. And I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond.
Gary doesn't like to self-promote, but you can also find him at This Is Pro Wrestling, TIPW show, where you've been doing a lot of cool stuff, interviews and after shows and all that shit for the NWA. So I'll help promote that for you, Gary.
Well, thanks. I just figure you get to This Is Gary Horde. Eventually you'll find the other stuff.
I know, but you can promote your other shit, Gary. You put a lot of time into it.
I don't have an at D&D Beyond profile.
Neither do I.
You should.
Neither do I, but you can find me at Justin_Bishop. That's Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. You can find the show at Cinema_Shock. The Twitter and Instagram. You can also find us on Facebook. You can find us at cinemashock.net. If you go to cinemashock.net, you'll find all of our episodes. You'll find links to all of our series. Like you can find all the James Cameron movies linked all together, in one little series. If you want to start from the beginning, you can find links to our Discord, our merchandise, all that shit is on cinemashock.net. We do not have a Patreon yet, but if you have ideas for what you'd like to see on a Cinema Shock Patreon, what you would be willing to pay for on a Cinema Shock Patreon, please let us know. You can email us. You can find our email address on the website, or tweet at us or DM us on Instagram. We monitor all that shit pretty closely. So let us know. I'm curious what you guys want to see. And until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
Be excellent to each other.
Same thing happened to me with Johnny. Remember, I have no idea what's going on, right? I come home one day and the house is empty. I mean, completely empty. She even took the keys. What kind of sick bitch takes the keys? You know what? I say we concentrate on work, buddy. That's what I do every time my life turns to dog shit. I concentrate on work and that gets me by. All right, buddy, this is going to be great. You know what? We're going to catch some terrorists. We're going to beat the crap out of them. You're going to feel a hell of a lot better.
Nice.
Johnny, can't live with him. Can't kill him.
Thank you, Todd Arnold. I appreciate it. I really thought you were going to go with a Paxton.
I thought about it, but I was just like, oh, can I say the 10-year-old's ass line? Like
Justin already did.
I already said it. And there's also the she had a set of titties that make you want to stand up and beg for buttermilk.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that means. What does that even mean?
I don't know. Kind of gross sounded, honestly.
It does sound, I mean, who wants to drink buttermilk? Jesus
No,
Christ.
you put it on your cereal. Duh.
You don't put buttermilk on your cereal. What the fuck's wrong? You put it in a pancake, and that is the only thing you use buttermilk for.
I feel like there was an episode of the old Batman series I remember watching where he drank buttermilk at the and like Alfred delivered buttermilk to him and he drank
Jesus
it.
Christ.
Yeah.
Drinking regular milk is weird enough, honestly. Like, who the fuck drinks regular milk if you're not 3 years old?
Listeners, chime in and send all of your milk related hate mail to @Justin_Bishop.
Yeah, I don't give a fuck who's passionate about milk.